There we go. So we're live. A little before 3 o'clock. That's fine because we're ready to go. Well, Tino Von Struckmann, thanks for coming on Radiant Creators and chatting. You know, we interview inspiring people to inspire others. We think that's the best thing we can do to offer the world, basically, is inspiration. You know, talk to inspiring people, and hopefully that inspiration.
And you found me?
Yeah, you're inspiring. I mean, I know you're. It's expiring. You not expiring. Inspiring.
Oh,
you are.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely inspiring. Well, because I can do a brief little intro here, and I will. Let's do that. Just because I know when people read, it's a little boring. It always sounds like somebody's reading, but
people read.
Yeah, they do. Some.
Here?
Yeah, I read.
I never heard such silliness.
Yeah, I read short stories. I read headlines. I do, and I know everything.
I think that might be about the problem we're having here today.
Yeah. I read a couple headlines today. I know everything. You know. So Tino Von Struckmann. Intro: actor, writer, producer, director, military historian. Actor and military historian Tino Struckmann, hosting shows about history, urban exploration, action films, and fun travel show. Tino is a military veteran and writes military history. You may have seen him on CSI, E! Rising, Crossing Jordan, Timeless Fury, and currently he's acting on Colony. He hosts. Well, on YouTube, he hosts military history Q&As where you can send him your questions, and he really does actually answer them and research them if they're cool. Tino travels the world to film history documentaries and exploration videos just for you. And he also has a travel show, My Road, that's up there on his YouTube also. And he likes travel, food, bikes, cars, schnitzel, and stuff like that. Also, Tino is an author, and he wrote something interesting. Well, Stalked, what you can do about it. You did. And I say it's interesting. I actually ordered it and it's coming, so I haven't seen it. So I'm guessing
Where
it's
did you
interesting.
order it from?
Amazon. Stalked, what you can do about it's on Amazon.
Someone selling. Why didn't you just tell me to send you a copy?
Well,
I give them away. I give them away for free at this point. I didn't know there was any in stock left anymore. I thought that. Never mind.
Someone's got them on Amazon. So someone's selling your stuff on Amazon.
You better not have paid more than $10 for it.
It was only about $10, you know, a little bit more shipping.
All right. I saw one for sale for some $600 some time ago. And like, what did I do to this? It's like, what did I do to this one?
And so with that bit of a intro, well, what else do we miss? I mean, here we have Tino Von Struckmann, truly an amazing historian doing cool stuff. We're going to get into all that, but what did we miss as far as introducing you? You know,
I guess we really missed that I need to update my bio because the Colony is canceled.
Okay. I had a feeling that it didn't quite look right to me. I thought about that.
Well, wait a minute. I think that we canceled that show. And then this morning at the gym, one of the kids called me an old timer. So we really have to cut this short because I need Botox now. Well, he was half my age, which is almost impossible since I can't be more than 25 at this point.
29.
Yes. So, well, you know, it's interesting trying to not to sound like a Viagra commercial, but I sort of got to the point in my life where I can travel and I can document some of the things that mainstream history or networks are sort of ignoring. And it all started because, I mean, I grew up with my mom was Danish, and my granddad had a summer house on the Atlantic Wall. So I grew up playing soccer on the Atlantic Wall. My grandmother was an archaeologist, and I was surrounded by people who survived World War II. Not to mention those who didn't, but I didn't talk much to them. And so I from high school, college, one of my degrees, it was always military history. It was always sort of little nerdy. And even at boot camp, I would get people around and end up telling stories, which was interesting. So when I found myself, now that I worked in the film business for a while, and that's all good and well, but when I'm seeing the mainstream documentaries and I find myself yelling constantly at TV because that's wrong, or misrepresented, and we're looking at a complete and utter lack of in-depth history in our schools, And it all started years ago when I started asking people under 25 what happened at Pearl Harbor. And at last count, I think about 73% had no idea, but a few of them saw the movie. And the best answers I got was, well, we bombed them. At which point I realized, okay, I need to do something. I need to do something other than move. I need to actually take some of the stuff I know and start just from a common sense point of view, go to the places. This is what happened. And this is not what happened. And I spend a lot of time talking to networks about doing these shows. We go to castles, battlefields, the last Nazi secret that we all end up talking about, because it's fascinating of the things, the little things we haven't been told of World War II, and it's really the small things that influence our lives today to a degree that most people really don't know. And I think we to see where we are today, we sort of have to know, how did we get here, and what was the inspiration? Because it is very true that events continuously and always repeat themselves, and they are today, but they're not in a way that most people really don't think, because we're back to the 10-second sound bites, and that doesn't give you a full picture. If you talk about the rise, this whole language thing of fascism, as it was, as it is, you talk about the misconception between what is socialism and what was socialism and what is communism, and you see the people today that are college professors are reading Marx. And it's not like he was a well-adjusted, well-balanced individual. And you see all these traces of history, and you see these spike events, both on the left and the right, that use the same tactics that we're seeing today, just in a different way. And that's why we have to learn history. I always stay away from modern day politics for a number of reasons. That's one of those things that I don't think my private opinion is important, and it shouldn't, and it mustn't influence my presentation of history. And I think that is one of my major issues that annoys me with a lot of mainstream, especially television programming of history, is all I get, and books that shall not be named, because I have respect for the authors who takes time to sit down and write a book these days. But it bothers me when it is full of their opinions of events, of people, of things. If we are to be historians, we are to present, this is what I found, this is what happened, this is what I can, as far as I can document. This is what these people did. You make up your own mind. And I think that is the most important thing we can do as historians, is present facts, present information, or at least search for it, or present a balanced case or side of both. There's always 2, 3, 4 sides to every story, but it's not for me to tell you what I think about them. That's for you to figure out. I'll just tell you what I'm finding. And I found very interesting, that is one of the things I get a lot of compliments for, is that I'm specifically not turning this into a political or moral lecture. I'm just telling you what I found. And there's some history is fascinating. You don't have to embellish. You don't have to turn it into an opinion piece. And I think that is unbecoming of historians, because especially leading up to every war ever, since the Egyptians, the Vikings, everybody, it starts with what Goebbels would say a phased reveal, where you you start presenting a case of how horrible these people you want to go to war with is. The Egyptians did it. Everyone did it. There's always a reason. We need a reason to go to war with these people, and we need to get our population behind us. So I'm going to make up some stories for 6 months, and then finally I had enough, and I need to protect my country and go to war. Nothing has changed in thousands of years. But what the problem with that is, historians afterwards, war is done, hatchet's buried. Now it's for the historians to sort of clean up a lot of the pre-war and wartime propaganda, because, well, we may have said some things, but war is over, done, we're moving on. And that is one of the things I think is sad hasn't happened. And when it comes to World War II, it definitely hasn't happened, because denazification is fine, obviously. The problem is it has taken control of the historical narrative when it comes to World War II. And there's another side that is being completely ignored. And some of the films I made, I thought, well, it'd be interesting to do. Why don't somebody do a Band of Brothers from the German point of view?
Yeah,
because we know the American point of view, we know the Russian point of view, the French, the British. We know the points of views from the West, but what actually happened inside Germany and inside the Reich, and how and who, and especially how is right now is very, very, very important, because there are some parallels that most people don't seem to be aware of that has crept into the world today that probably would be noticed if anybody sort of put all the little points together.
Yeah,
and
well, that old saying, you know, those who don't remember the past are condemned to repeat it. And I think that, well, of course, there's some truth in that, but where the truth might be missing is that, how do I put it? You have to study it in the first place. So, you know, the thing is, like, those that don't remember the past are condemned to repeat it. Well, most people aren't going to remember it. They weren't there. So you have to study it, and then also study it, you know, from sources that are factual, let's say,
yes,
we'll try to be non-biased there. But then even biased sources. Like, I get a lot of history from, I love soldiers' journals. That's something I love.
Yes. Oh, because, Lord, yes.
Yeah. Now, you know, it's written from a certain perspective, but that's fine, right? You know, you've got an intellect, you can discern.
But at the time, it was written at the time the guy was there, and he was feeling whatever he was feeling, and that's what's important. He was seeing what's unfolding around him. The post-war diaries, the memoirs, that's a problem. The diaries are great.
They're great, and if you can get your hands on those, they're amazing. And you know, I've got one book upstairs, forget what it's called, but it's just a book that somebody collected of letters from German soldiers home, and that correspondence. And you're just seeing these letters that went back and forth, and you realize that, I mean, they were, you know, hey, Aunt so-and-so, how are the chickens doing? It really humanizes them. They're the same, like, just guys. And so we have to study the past, of course, study history, and then, you know, gain that wisdom that it offers. And I think one of the biggest problems we have is that all we know is the superficial narrative, and we're seeing that from a presentarian's standpoint. It seems like for a historian, something to break through is get past the presentarian's bias and standpoint and realize that there's a great documentary that McNamara did called The Fog of War.
Yes.
Yeah, and like one of his lessons, like lesson number 1 was empathize with your enemy. And he was saying it's one of the things that we were very bad at. He was saying in Vietnam and in World War II was that we had no idea who we were fighting or why. We didn't know why that other soldier was there. And so I think that when we start to look at the big picture, and just looking at World War I and World War II, and that kind of one extended war there, we don't really have to study. You know, you mentioned not being political. Well, the thing is, I think maybe one of the best ways to get a hold of and understand today's political situation that you say that the U.S. and maybe the world is in, really ignore it to a certain extent. Just look at the headlines, but then look at World War II. You look at the rise of, you had Lenin and Stalin mass murdering their way all the way to Poland. Then him and, you know, Stalin and Hitler kind of high-fived, and then Hitler mass murdered his way to East, and then the Russians mass murdered their way back. And you start thinking of all the politics of, I don't know, to me, that story is the story of where we're at this very moment.
And it's interesting, like you said, I think the American condition is very often to be, I am a very proud American. I love my country, and I do also understand that sometimes we wave the flag a little too hard. Totally get it. And sometimes we go to war to go to places with people we have absolutely no idea who they are, what they are, where they're from, and we kind of don't do that well for the first year or two until we sort of start. Oh, let's find out who these people are exactly. I've just sort of seen that forever, and a part of going to war must be the empathy, must be the understanding of who are these people. Let's try to find out, why are they fighting us? What is their mindset? And I think that is the psychological aspect of the enemy, and their motivations are incredibly important when you go to war in any campaign, in any kind of negotiation. You need to understand, and that's where the diplomacy today is failing, is because we are not speaking the same language, and we're not understanding where they're coming from. And another thing in history is what I'm also seeing is a selective. When I see people, they talk about all these wonders of socialism and communism. Well, everybody had good ideas. And if you only focus on the good ideas and you sort of forget about the millions of imprisons and tortures and people picked up in the middle of the night, well, then I guess the good ideas sound all that good, right? Hitler had good ideas. Well, yeah. I don't know exactly how we got to the point where, no, we can't definitely not talk about some of the good ideas that Hitler may have had. We can only talk about the great ideas Stalin had. I'm like, what? Like, are you people crazy? Yeah. It's the socialist, National Socialist. For the people living under the yoke, there's not a whole lot of difference what the poster says. You're still not free and living a happy life, and you better keep your mouth shut, and you better worry about what your neighbor's going to say about you. So, we need to stop being selective in how we choose to portray history, and just, this is the good, this is the bad, you decide. And I think that's this. Again, we need to look at, well, who and why are history books written, and how did we get here since World War II, and what's missing? Because a lot of things just seem to be missing, and it's those small things that probably is making the difference, and really had left the legacy. We always talk about who actually won World War II, and if you look at 1948, by 1948, Germany's economy was far better than it was in 1936. They had more machinery. They'd been bombed. People had been killed. They'd been divided. But the West German economy was flourishing. They had more money. The businesses had all benefit. The business had benefited from the war, which is something, well, we need to help them. But a lot of the help came from money that left Germany towards the end of the war and then came back and rebuilt the businesses. So when you look at who really won World War II, one could say, well, certainly a whole lot of businesses won World War II. And these were incidentally the same people who put Hitler in power. And it's very interesting because in 1932, when the National Socialist Party under Hitler was running for another election, Hitler had all the delegates that was running under the Nazi Party sign that they would not accept directorships for businesses or banks. That's not a bad idea, is it?
Yeah.
No. You're a politician. No, you're not a businessman. But on the other hand, on the side, on the back end of that, the businesses and the banks were the ones that had funded the campaign and the whole Nazi Party and the propaganda and the newspapers and everything. So yes, but he was taking straight money through the back door for all their endeavors. But they're not going to have politicians and businesses mix in office, which I thought was like, well, that's interesting.
Along with something that I'm reminded of when you're speaking is McNamara's saying fog of war again. Like lesson number 7 was belief and seeing are often both wrong. So that's the thing, and that's very humbling right there when you start realizing that if you truly want to be, well, a historian, if you want to study history, you'd have to realize that we do have our biases. We see things from a presentarian standpoint, and that the study of history is never done. So it kind of has to be a little bit humbling because you realize that, well, I don't know everything I will know. And I may totally change my view on things because it's already happened many times.
Thing in the world.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's nothing worse than that locked door, and you're like, how dare you lock this door? How dare you not send me this document? I need to know because, well, I'm me, and that's just reason enough.
No, I get it. I also wanted to mention you mentioned so a lot of people are watching the Nazi Secret, of course, because, well, they are. But also you did what's called Great Forts, or was it Great Castles? I forget the series name.
Yeah, I wish I could come up with a better name than great forts or great castles. See, it's I would love to, but that's kind of what it is. It is about the great castles and fortresses of the world, and I'm working my way forward through the evolution of modern warfare and fortress warfare by visiting all these cool places where the firsts of things took place and is still in existence, like the first steel dome, the first cannon racing dome, and the first breech loaders, and how everything sort of changed in military evolution, because military evolution trickles over into civilian life, and if it wasn't because of our desire to kill each other, we wouldn't be as advanced as we are today, and that's just a fact of life.
Oh, it's very true.
It's an interesting journey, and once I paddled up to the last fort I have is Cold War 50s. And I'm going to stop there. And then I have a lot of World War I. And then I can start putting in different, I just want to go sort of a couple hundred years at a time. Now I'm up to just after the Franco-Prussian War, which it's very interesting, because we talk about all the horrible things that happened in World War II. That was not necessarily much worse than the horrible things that took place during World War I, which was not really that much worse than the horrible thing that took place during the Franco-Prussian War, which was not that bad as the ones of the 30-year war, which was the 100-year. Wars are just horrible, messy, terrible things where tons of people die and people are enslaved. Problem with World War II. World War II was just the first one that really is in living memory and was caught on camera. So that is always the one we refer to. We can't go back and look at photos from the 100-year war to the 30-year war, and it's past memory. But the horrible things that happened in World War II have happened time and time and time before. It's not that was a new thing. It's not like the communists or the Nazis. They said, "Oh, this is a new way of killing and tormenting people." They just revisited the last one and the last one and the last one. We had more technology and we got, unfortunately, better at it. And I think that's the interesting lesson about history, is that I really would love to go back into older wars and talk all about the plight of the civilization and the civilians. Again, it's like we've got to do it, and people have to want to watch it.
Oh yeah. Well, your forts, the one with, great forts or great castles, I think, because it's really about like stone, steel, and cement, like cement, stone, and steel.
That's actually better. That's a better title than
cement, stone, and steel. There you go. Take note. Make a playlist: cement, stone, and steel.
Rebrand that one. But
and that one definitely deserves a playlist of its own, because for those who are interested in history and what we're talking about, maybe the Nazi secret might not be for you, but the work you've done on the great, fortresses of stone and cement and steel are great, because the thing about it is it's great quality video. And the thing is that you're seeing it you really bring them to life. And I love the fact that so much is being documented like that you're walking through, you're talking to tour guides. The one tour guide who you never mentioned his name, I don't think, but he looked like something straight out of a Tolkien novel. He was amazing. It was when you were inside the steel dome and you were looking at the big cat with the big guns in there, and he was talking about how hot it is in the summer.
One in Denmark, Christopher. Yeah.
That guy.
I try to put their names down. He's a great guy. That's actually one of the next episodes coming up. The entire one of that show. That was great.
Yeah.
And yeah, that was fun. I mean, it's funny because I lived in Denmark for years, and I never really. There's just like things that Alison Morissette song, isn't it? Like typical. I live in Europe for years, and all of these forts and battlefields were all around me. Now I'm living in LA, and now I have to fly there to get to them. And like, oh, now I want to see it. Now I have the time. And we'll always go back. That's the story of life, the things we wish we had done.
Mm-hmm.
And especially now that I see so many of these bunkers and forts and tunnels being quietly closed off and buried over the years. If I had done this in the late 90s or early 2000s, I would have had access to so much more. But I suppose that's the journey of life. We do things, and then we do things comes around whenever they come around in our lives that this is time to do this.
Yeah.
It should have come around like 20 years ago, but
Oh, it's great that it's being documented because, I think there's kind of a race. We want to document these things, video them, talk about them, talk to the tour guides, go deep into these great forts before they're gone, in one way or the other, before they're unavailable to us, before they're gone.
Yeah. I mean, the great castles and forts are probably not going anywhere, certainly not in our lifetime, because there's no deliberate desire to destroy them. But when it comes to World War II, and especially the German World War II in Germany and Austria, that is constantly living under a sword of Damocles, because you never know. They don't want to talk about it. They don't like it. Bad things happen. No. If they can bury everything, they will. And that scares me because for a number of reasons. And it pisses me off because they will literally tear down historical tunnels and access to really important historical locations, and then they'll build some modern, shiny, metally museum and put photos of something that not really have any relation to what happened in the place they destroyed, as opposed to just open it up, clean it up, give access. That really annoys me. This is where now, if I was independently wealthy, there would be some places that would be purchased and restored and cleaned up. And there's some of the forts in there's a lot of forts in France that was built. They're not really in any danger. They're just being eaten by nature. That absolutely should be restored and into museums. And these are all done little bit piecemeal by a small group of volunteers that's always diminishing, that are spending their weekends. And I've met the wives too. They are spending their weekends, sometimes with very little enthusiasm from home, cleaning up brush and nature and weeds to protect some of these sometimes 100-year-old forts, especially the World War I forts and the pre-World War I forts. I mean, they're getting old, and there's no government really have any interest in restoring some of these. Like around Metz in France, Alsace-Lorraine, after the Franco-Prussian War, the Germans built two circles of fortresses, huge fortresses around Metz. So one of them had like 6,000 men and 3,000 men artillery forts. Really, some of them still have the cannons in that are just sitting there. Yes. And I want to go to every single one of them, and a lot of them are still owned by the military, but they don't care, and they're just individually different, which is just fascinating because they were built in a time after the Franco-Prussian War, before World War I, where sort of cement became a thing, slowly rebar started becoming a thing. The whole evolution of war a lot happened in that evolution in that time period. So it's just important to protect and preserve these. Again, but it's not going to happen because the government don't care. The French government's not going to care about a German-built fort in the backyard. So we have small groups of volunteers like Fort Timbutzig. Spent 40 years. Peter spent 40 years on preserving this place. And it's amazing historians that are working out there trying to do this. And that's why I'm saying with military reenactments, it is just so important to at least support people doing this, because they're keeping history alive. And there's no excuse that's good enough not to. And the whole, I don't want to hear, German reenactors, you offend. I don't want to hear it. Yeah. I really don't want to hear it. If you're offended by history, well, I'm sorry, butterfly. History happened. So, just ignoring it by destroying it, it's heartbreaking.
Yeah. And for people who are offended, the thing is, that's seeing it from a presentarian standpoint. Once again, it's that I'll sometimes ask people, I'd say, well, look, I mean, if you think about every soldier that's gone off to war, probably all through history, they were, fighting in the name of nationalism and propaganda. So what makes one form of nationalism and propaganda? Or they were fighting because, well, if you don't go fight, we'll wipe out your family. There's every soldier has gone to war for one of a very few reasons.
And it's usually not their choice to do so.
Yeah.
You sign up for your country, and then sometimes your country does things that you do or do not agree with. It doesn't really matter. You're going.
Yeah. And then sometimes you find yourself in the fight. Like if you, what they called it, the civilian troops in Germany, the folks. Yes, the Volkssturm.
Yeah.
Like they didn't have a choice. I mean, if you're living in Berlin and the Russians are coming, what are you going to do? You're going to be the Volkssturm. I mean, there you go.
Yeah, it's like the German army didn't want to go. They didn't want to go to war. They really didn't think they didn't think they could win to begin with. When you start go back to the late 30s, so you can say, well, was it the German soldiers' fault? Was it the Russian soldiers' fault? We all know what the Russians did when they got to Berlin. Is that everyone's fault? The thing about war is it brings out the very worst and the very best in a lot of people. And that is part of being a human being, is at some point in time, if you spend enough time in war, you will be desensitized to violence. It's part of it. And if you have that instilled with having lost friends or family, now you're not just fighting for your politicians' cause. You're fighting for your country. You're fighting for the ones you lost, and you might lose sight of humanity. And that's that is psychology. And I guess we're getting better at that. But we're also, that is an interesting dichotomy of war. Is through history, the way you win a war is by killing your enemy, and a lot of them. And if you sometimes had to burn down the village and kill all of them so they wouldn't come back after you, that's always been the origins of war. World War II was the same. And ever since, when they start talking about a civil war, let's wage war in civilian ways and non-lethal munitions, and it is not how the other side fights. And that's probably a good reason why we have not specifically won outrageously well over the past many years since, because you can't have the basis of human emotion of going to war is to kill so you can go home. And for whatever your motivations are, if you try to do that with hands tied behind the back, well, then eventually the enemy will be at your gates. And that's just the truth of the matter. Is it is a ruthless, terrible thing that should not happen. And the reason why we're talking about history and we talk about the victims is because we really don't want to see any more of our young men come home with their arms or legs missing. And when we speak to the concentration camp victims that worked in some of the tunnels and it worked in some of the labor sites during Second World War, like in Ebensee, where they themselves said, we want one of these tunnels preserved so people can see what we did here and remember us. And I was like, yes, of course. That's why these places need to be preserved, because they were all built by blood, and that there's reason enough to preserve them and talk about them. And I guess that we can do what we're doing. It's kind of all we can do is try to balance and educate and
putting out the content is important, like the way actually exactly what you're doing. I mean, because like great forts, that's great. Anybody who's got an interest in not just military history, if you like documentaries at all about history, you're going to dig great forts or steel, stone, and cement, as we'll rename it. Cement, steel, and stone.
Do you want credit for that? Because that actually is a better name than the one I came up with. I think we're going to have to put that out to viewer vote here. I think you came up with a better name for my show than I.
Should that be cement, steel, and stone?
Cement, steel, and stone. That's better.
I like
Damn
it.
You.
Yeah, because it's what it looks like.
Damn Navy people with your ideas.
So maybe we'll call it that. But if a person likes history at all, you're going to dig that series. And then also, of course, The Last Nazi Secret, very, very important stuff. Helps you see history from a non-presentarian perspective, and especially if you're already into such things. But I do think that right now is an important time in history, and putting out the content that you're doing, especially in Last Nazi Secret, all of it, but especially that,
Yeah.
is that, well, we talk about those who don't remember the past or contend to repeat it. Well, of course, you got to study it first and gain wisdom from it. But I oftentimes wonder if, well, you know who does remember the past? Our world leaders. They do. And I sometimes wonder
Some of them do.
if that's, well, the thing is, I do wonder, I think civilians, it's like, hey, you know, you veterans, you guys in the military, civilians, whatever. I think it's up to us. This is a time in history where we really need to learn from a non-presentarian standpoint history, because if you understand, like, you know, Trotsky and Lenin and Stalin's rise to power and their shenanigans and just the mass methods and the mass murder of people and then, you know, all the farmers in the Ukraine, they called them, oh, I forget the word for it, greedy farmers. They called them,
yeah, they starved a third of the population of Ukraine to death.
Yeah, and they called them. They had a word for them. I forget what it is now, but
I know that.
It's on the tip of my tongue. But we'll think of it. It'll come to us. And then to think also that we allied. I think it's something that people could really find some introspection if they would realize that we allied with Stalin.
Oh, I mean,
it's like. And that there is something for people to think about. If you think that's okay, you need to know who this guy was. There's no good side to that.
And that was such an interesting partnership of convenience. And I think Churchill had a lot to do with it, although no one liked or trusted Stalin. And yet I always said it was interesting that because the British and the French and eventually America went to war to protect the sovereignty of Poland, that we inevitably completely and utterly gave up and sold out the Poles. And we did. We let Stalin have Poland, half Germany, half almost all of Eastern Europe for all these years, doomed to live in communism. And then one can wonder, well, was that better than the alternative? Why do you go to war to fight? So you can go, you obviously then didn't go to war to try to protect Poland. So why did you go to war? Besides, we're back to the harsh fact is everybody made money on going to war, just like they do today. And that is the really disgusting part. But that really is what it boils down to. And it should be about, well, when did anybody go to war to actually for a good cause? I mean, a real good cause.
Yeah, I think the only time that really happens is when you find yourself like the Volkssturm and you're in Berlin and you can't run and you're defending. Maybe that's the only good war, when somebody attacks you and you defend your home.
You have to defend your neighborhood. And your family. And
that's one of the things about having been in the military that I think really is something that, well, people who are veterans, they get, is we can look at we can armchair historian the crap out of, you know, the Volkssturm in Berlin. But the truth is they were there and that was their situation and they had to fight. And so how that situation happened, it's irrelevant to that person who is the Volkssturm and is looking at the Russians coming and figuring, I just got to buy time for my family to run.
I mean, you're deployed. You know what it eventually boils down to, that the life around your fob, that is really the only part of your life that matters that you can change. Maybe there's a village next to your fob and you'll try to help that village and you'll build things and you'll take care of that handful of people that is within your sphere. You don't think about, I am here to protect the whole country. No, you're here to keep you and your friends safe and the handful of civilians outside your fence sort of safe, and help them out, and you get to know them and you trade with them and you build their waterworks and then give them bathrooms and sneak them chocolate. That is your world of that conflict. You're not unless you're ranking enough that you're looking at a bigger picture. For most soldiers, the picture is what you can see around you, and that's the influence you're trying to change. I remember growing up watching MASH, and I didn't realize when I was younger how political it actually was.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't realize that. But I remember Hawkeye always said when somebody asked him if he was trying to save the world, and he said, no, just my little corner of it. And I figure if we all just say, well, you know what? We're all going to try to make our little corner of the world a better place. and help our neighbor across the street and whatever. The things we can see, if we make that a better place and we all stand together on that, we don't have to worry about the bigger picture. We can't necessarily all fix the bigger picture, and less as time seems to progress. But we can make our neighborhood better or cleaner or nicer and safer. And that's really what matters, because we care about what we can see.
Yeah, and it's kind of in your last Q&A, you did a little emotional health PSA, and it reminded me of something that
you can answer. I can't answer.
Yeah, a guy named CZ. He's the CEO of the company Binance. Anyway, he mentioned, he said, there is no work-life balance. There's no work-life balance. Find something that gives your life purpose and work on it. That really, you're always alive. Yeah. There's no work-life balance. Just find something that is your passion, or that is your passions. Get a dog, be an historian, do your thing. And that's it, really. I do believe so. That's it. How do you make the world a better place? Yeah, the big picture gets very difficult. And I think the emotional health PSA you did was really kind of important, because one of the things you did mention was, well, women are more intuitive than men. Probably. And
come on.
It seems, well, they are, and the thing is, if you keep that equilibrium, if you find something that is a passion for you and you do it, that's your role in making the world a better place, and not so much obsessing about the media and what's going on right now. But do you think that the intuition that you spoke of, I think if you study history and you learn it, and then you cultivate your own intuition through happiness, health, wealth, and all that good stuff, then you can stay a step ahead of whatever is going to befall our society.
I mean, if you understand, like I said, my 2 degrees are in psychology and history, which on one hand, when it comes to a financial standpoint, are probably rather useless. I don't remember ever having a job where I had to present my diplomas to anyone, and today the psychology wouldn't really. But if you understand psychology of people and sociology and history, well, then you know human behavior and you know how things usually go in a certain setting. That makes it fairly easy for you to see where things are going. I rarely watch the news. I never watch the news. I just wait for somebody to send me a text about, this is what happened today. Like, all right, fine. This is how little I watch the news. I usually watch YouTube, but there's always somebody with a lecture on something that's interesting, and sometimes they're broken up by commercials. One of them for this whole election that we're having in California today. And the commercial started with, in this troubled time where Delta's running rampant. And my thought was, the airline's rioting? I used to fly with them. What did they do?
The planes are attacking.
I know. I was like, I keep having that scene from Naked Gun with the postal servers are going crazy down the stairs, and I'm like, the airline's going postal, right? See, I mean, we remember going, but what the going postal means. And I was like, I didn't. Okay. I'm sure the Guard has sent me a briefing or a newsletter or something where I probably should have known, but whatever. If I need to know, someone will tell me. Yeah. But it's a much happier way of living that way, because I know I know what's coming. I know what they're going to say and do, because looking at history, I just need to just give me a half an hour breakdown and say what's said and done today. I don't know what happens in the next 6 months. So why bother? Why I can try to spend my time presenting places that people can't go to, especially now when they can't travel. And believe me, the moment we can actually all travel, I'll start doing tours in Europe to bring people in buses and go out and see these places in person. I know a lot of people want to do that, and I would love to do that. But right now, good thing about being able, I can travel. So I can go out there and I can film all these locations. And I was sort of planning on making great castles that it won't be called anymore. I will travel around the world and film historic forts and locations and battlefields for the rest of my life, because I'll never run out. At some point in time, we will know everything about General Kamla and everything about World War II. We can either find in a lifetime, we're allowed to find, or we find the answers we're looking for. But there will always be amazing historical locations that I can go film and I can show. And there's nothing I love more than when I go to old battlefields, old forts, from all the different wars. And I have veterans write me back, says, I'm a wounded veteran. I can't travel anymore. I always wanted to see these places. I'm glad that you can show them. And that makes it worth it. There's so many people that can't, for various reasons, travel, not just now, but also physically, and to go through these places and just show them. And I mean, there's some of the guys on YouTube that I'll sit and watch History Hunter forever. And we're gonna go team up at some point in time.
Really?
We're gonna do a couple of things. We're supposed to have done it 2 months ago, but where he is, that I'm not allowed to mention, I couldn't go in without sitting in a hotel room for 7 days. And no, don't have the sort of time in my life. I'm aging. Don't have 7 days to do nothing. So that had to wait. And but we're going to, and I'm going to England. I'm going to drag Drakhinifel to 1,000 years of castles in England. He loves medieval. Drakhinifel is a naval historian that's on YouTube, and he's got a great, really, really intelligent. He's an engineer. He knows everything about battles, ships, and naval history. And he's a great guy. And he does medieval fighting as well. So either he thinks he knows or wants to, I can't even remember if I told him, but we're going to go 2,000 years of castles in England. Sometimes it's easy. It's like do the Goebbels way. We're just going to announce it, and then that's how you know that it's coming. When in 1932, when Hitler was on the fence if he should run as chancellor against Ludendorff, Goebbels just announced that he was going to, because Hitler couldn't make up his mind. So Goebbels made up his mind for him, and done. Now you're running.
Wow. Talk about, so little did we know that Goebbels was actually the root, the first new age person who kind of coined see it and be it. Talk about the power of intention. He was like, I see this guy as the leader, and well, there you go.
He did that constantly. He constantly put up press releases and did speeches. A lot of people, they don't seem to understand that Goebbels was not just, if you take the press secretary of the White House today, or any time, is the person that sort of reads the cover opinion of the House today, and this is sort of the news, and this is whatever briefing, and not a whole lot of opinion, not a whole lot of going on. Goebbels was the driving force between the public face of the Nazi Party. He raised thousands of dollars. He alone would have 20, 30, sometimes 50,000 people come to hear him speak. And he very much had a following. He was the one that did the posters, did the campaigns, arranged for Hitler to fly to the 50 cities in 50 days. All of that was all Goebbels. And I think a lot of people, they underestimate his influence on also the Holocaust, because he was far more anti-Semitic than many of the others. After the 1933 election, Hitler really didn't, there's not a whole lot of his papers that figures any Jewish concern. It seemed to have been a great gimmick to get into office, because blame someone to go somewhere, but for it to really have taken off seemed to have been forced by Goebbels and the people around him, now put in power, which was very interesting. So he had a lot more power, a lot more say than we think. And I'm working on a series about the SS. It started about a history of the Ahnenerbe, because there's some unanswered questions. A lot of people wrote me about the Ahnenerbe, do a special on them. The more you dig into them, the more information and disinformation you find. So to do it right, I really need to research some things. I need to go to Himmler's library, which part of which is in Prague. I need to go back to Wewelsburg and convince them to actually talk about something. And to do that, I need to do a special on the SS, and to really do that in depth on how powerful they were and how an industry ran the country. I have to do a special on Himmler, because Himmler did build the SS. He didn't start them or found them, but he built them into what they were. So I have to do a special on Himmler. And there's a couple of thousand pages that I really have to read to do these episodes. And this is something I want to do right, because if I do, especially on the SS and on the history of the Reich and how this is really how it all happened. It's going to be a lot of talking, because there's obviously not a whole lot of photo. Well, there's some footage and video I can put in there, but it's a lot of information. And I think if I do it right, it could be something that historians could use as a reference point for a long time to come. Especially, I have friends that are history teachers that sometimes put on a specific episode I did, or some of the other guys do, because it just makes it an easy way to explain. And I figure, well, if we have to explain how this happened, I have to do it right, and I don't want to make any mistakes, because that could hopefully maybe be, I'm going to say a teaching tool, because that would be a little ego high, but at least a resource.
Yeah.
So, I want to do that right. So that takes a little longer, because episodes all the time and traveling. And then when do I have time to research? There's going to be a little downtime at some point where I'm going to be a little quieter.
Yeah, maybe while you're waiting, maybe while you're in quarantine for 7 days, you can at some point you can do that. Yeah, that'd be a great one, because I always wonder about. I know they're not the same thing, and they're not exactly connected, but the Freikorps,
yes,
and then the SA. I mean, then of course. Well, here's one. Like I always thought, if I can find that note about. So we had Ernst Röhm, right? He was heading up the SA at the time, right? Well, anyway, that whole transition between the troops come back from World War I, the German troops, they realize, hey, wait a second, this is not the way we left things. You get the Freikorps come along, you have those battles, and eventually you have somehow it seems to me that translated eventually into an SS in a way, even though the Freikorps kind of went away. Like I've often thought, and this is way out there, this is just fun speculation, but I've always thought the battle that lost World War II kind of happened before it ever started. And it's just that the whole thing is, it was Night of the Long Knives, because you had the purge of Nazi leaders by Adolf back on June 30, 1934. And then fearing that the paramilitary SA had become too powerful, Hitler ordered his elite SS guards to murder the organization's leaders, including Ernst Röhm. And I've always thought something always gave me a feeling that was when the war was lost. It sounds crazy, but it just seems like a German people would say, damn, that is ruthless. How do you trust this guy?
Well,
or maybe not.
You backstab after the let's do a quick
Freikorps,
recap.
yeah.
The Freikorps was German paramilitary organizations that generally banded together and kept fighting communists around, not outside Germany as well. You had German Freikorps that fought in the Baltics, 1919. They fought against the Russians, fought against the socialists. The Latvians had them help them fight, and then the Germans thought they would be allowed to stay, and the Latvians said we wouldn't give them any land anyway, so they left, and there was a lot of fighting going on. And in the years, in the 20s and early 30s, you have to look at a completely divided country between the left and the right. You had the Russians, Lenin, Stalin, Trotsky, wanted a socialist revolution to take place inside Germany. That's how they thought they were going to win World War I, by having these communist insurgents try to rally the troops, rally the factory workers to strikes and so on. It didn't work in 1918. They thought they could end. Remember, after the Russian Revolution, Russia kept fighting against Germany. But now it was the Red Army that was run by commissars and Communist Party faithfuls who had no idea how to fight, because they had dismissed all the white Russian officers who was traditionally the Russian army. And that didn't go well. You can't put a bunch of commissars in charge of a bunch of soldiers. That's why at the end of World War I, the Germans had pushed the Russians all the way back up into the Baltics. The Germans at the end of World War I held far more territory than they did from the beginning, which is also a bit of reason that we just lost the war, but we're sitting on twice as much territory as we had. Stabbing it back and all those legends. But as the war ended, the German army pulled back in, but except in the east, it wasn't until the Treaty of Versailles they were pushed. They had to leave, and the communists still kept trying to spurred these little revolutions that never really happened. It's just small cities were taken over by communists. The Freikorps went in. They had fighting in the streets. And you had all of the 20s where, you remember, Hitler tried to take over by putsch in 1924. And, well, 1924. Was it 24 or 23? I forget. Never mind. But you had this enormous unrest on the streets. And after a lot of the people from the Freikorps banded together under the SA, you had a lot of different parties sort of wanting the same thing, that all eventually folded in under the same umbrella of the National Socialist Party, that not initially had Hitler as a leader, of course, but eventually he emerged as the better speaker, as the leading figure. Whereas Ernst Röhm, who was a World War I veteran, and this was a world where a lot of the Nazi leaders were relatively young, and a lot of them were too young to have served in World War I. And the badge of honor still was who had fought and served in World War I. Well, Röhm was one. Goebbels didn't because he had his lump foot. Himmler was in the academy as the war ended. He almost made it. His brother made it. A lot of the guys that just didn't make it. So you had these veterans. They banded together under Röhm because he was a veteran. They were a veteran. Hitler was a veteran, and that helped. The problem with you continuously had this band of a lot of the SA was unemployed. Well, not a lot of them. They were blue collar workers. A lot of them, where a lot of the leaders were ex-officers from the First War. And now you're looking at a Germany under huge inflation, and you have the SA and the communists in the streets of Germany fighting and killing each other on a daily basis. You have an enormous unrest, and the army was not a big fan of the communists, of course. The later 20s, the government had more socialist leanings. Brüning's government was very, very much a socialist government. And interestingly enough, Brüning's government in the 30s were very much coming after the Nazis, kept banning Goebbels from speaking, kept banning the newspapers, banning the flyers to go out, banning public meetings, banning them to have Hitler wasn't allowed to go on the radio to talk against Ludendorff when they were running for chancellor. Yeah, this sounds very familiar. Speaking of history repeating itself.
There you go.
And of course, then the National Socialists eventually won and then did the same thing to them. So it's just like, okay. But the problem was you had this rowdy SA that were a bit rowdy and a bit drunk and causing a bit of trouble. And Hitler had a problem controlling them. Röhm, he went to Bolivia for a while. The law wanted. He got in trouble with the law after the putsch, after the failed putsch. Röhm left the country. Göring went to Sweden. A lot of people they left because they had to get out, otherwise they got arrested. Hitler stayed back with a few others, got arrested with Hess, put in prison. And he called Röhm back to control the SA because you had the different fractions within the SA that were not exactly on board. Hitler did, after he got out of prison, said, "Oh, we are going to win by following the law. We're going to win the election. No more revolutions, no more armed uprising, no more coups." And the SA were all in favor of doing a coup. Things did not go fast enough for them. And as a counterbalance to the SA, Hitler started the SS because there were factions within the SA that wanted to get rid of Hitler. He brought Röhm come back to Germany to take control of the SA because they still respected him. And he did. And now he has these 2 million SA men. And at the same time, you have the SS being built up as a counter, initially as a bodyguard force for Hitler, swearing out loyalty to him and only to him. Possibly, and there were times when you had standoffs between the SS and the SA. And because the SA wanted more seats when in the local governments, they wanted to run more people. And they weren't really allowed to. So you had the National Socialists, you had the Nazi Party, you had the SS, you have the SA, which are sort of three fractions somewhat divided. And the SS and the party were not always on board. You did not necessarily see eye to eye with the party, with the SS, because the SS grew up seeing themselves as an elite. because they didn't go rally, they didn't go march, they didn't go scream and fight in the street. They stayed back in the room and remained quiet. Was Himmler? He said that an SS man needs to see and hear and not be seen or heard, whereas the SA was just the opposite. And the SA Röhm, he wanted to take over. He wanted to replace the army with his 2 million SA men. That again was a bit of a rowdy bunch that ran around and beat people up in the streets. So did the communists. So it was sort of even a free-for-all, but it wasn't fun for the establishment. It wasn't fun for the business, for the bankers, for any government or any of the industrialists, because they were afraid of the revolution. The SA wanted a revolution. They wanted a coup to a degree that Hitler wanted to go within the law of getting into power, which he eventually did. He won his elections. And at that point, he didn't need the SA anymore. The SA was still ready to go fight and start a revolution. And Röhm was now talking about replacing the army with him. So now you have the army as a very well-respected organization in Germany. It's probably the last one that actually held respect, because most of the government officials didn't really have a whole lot of respect to them or like to them. But it was just a situation where the SS was growing, and Himmler was growing the SS to be that elite. There was not you wouldn't find a royal family within the German sphere of influence that didn't have a son that was in the SS, because the SS was that elite. They were the cool kids. They get to sit in front of the movie theaters. People think that, well, they joined the SS because they were Nazis. No, they joined the SS because that was the in crowd at that time. That was to become the special forces. And yes, they got special privileges. And they were given special privileges also because of their social status of a lot of the SS people. That was completely opposite of the SA. So now you have one force that is growing, and the SS was far more acceptable to the army and to the industrialists and to the bankers who were backing Hitler, because they were not the rowdy bunch. So when then Röhm, in some days before, you start, of course, you have Heydrich with the SD, the Sicherheitsdienst. They're starting to build a case against Röhm because they need to curb that power base, because now it's competing with Hitler's power base and himself, and they're causing trouble. And now Hitler's backers are bankers and businessmen and proper people that could see them making money from him being chancellor. They bet their money on him. But like the army said, we need to curb Röhm and the SA. And so now you're looking at, did Röhm conspire to kill Hitler and to overthrow him and take power? He certainly wanted to. But the two couldn't coexist at this point. Because if they both want power in the country, well, and Hitler's now chancellor, then there's no room for Röhm.
Yeah.
There's no room for Röhm. He outlived his purpose, but he's also a threatening power base with 2 million people. He started gathering weapons in arms depots, and his Standartenführer Julius Ulm said he had been tasked by Röhm to personally kill Hitler. Röhm had also he had announced when he took over, his ambassador as Karl Ernst was the new ambassador of France. So Röhm was setting up his cabinet. He was making plans, and he was incidentally making plans on July 30th as well. That could also have been cooked up by Heydrich. But certainly it was going to be, one of them are going to have to go. And Hitler was in power, and he came first. So the question is, I think it was more of a gamble that Hitler came, because wasn't and told about this until the day before. He was lied. Goebbels told him, Himmler told him that, there's uprisings, and they exaggerated the situation in Berlin while Hitler was out of Berlin with Röhm. And certainly Himmler and Heydrich, they worked up a case against Röhm that was probably more than lightly exaggerated, but certainly Röhm had also made plans to get rid of Hitler. He had also, and again, they weren't talking towards the end. They were talking about having a meeting. Hitler had sent him on 30 days leave out of Berlin because the SA were getting to the point where they were getting out of control. The SA had attacked the SS people now. Now you're looking at them actively fighting here and there. So he sent Röhm on 30 days vacation. And that's why he had to end up down in Bad Tolz, where they eventually went to get him. So it's not that there was much of a choice. If Hitler wanted to stay in power, he had to get rid of Röhm. And the interesting thing of the somewhat 130 people that was killed in the Night of the Long Knives, 3 SS men were also killed because of their excessive brutality to prisoners in Himmler's labor camps, in their correctional facilities like Dachau, which was very interesting because the correctional facilities Himmler set up was entirely differently motivated than they were after the war began. And he was very much of a straight. They raised rabbits in Dachau. They had an herb garden in Dachau. Things you don't see on the postcards. So it was sort of one of those things that it had to go to one or the other. And now you can say, okay, if Röhm had gotten rid of Hitler, then what? Then you might probably have lost the support of the army. Then you lost the support of the business, of the banks, and you would have looking at that would have emboldened the socialist and the communist movement in Germany, and then there would have been open street fighting. So it wasn't that would be the other side, because the common man really wasn't on board with the SA tactics anymore, and the establishment certainly wasn't. And interesting enough, Hitler at this point was working within the establishment. So if Röhm had gotten rid of Hitler, then we would probably be looking at another civil war in 1934. And certainly he would have declared martial law, no more elections, and that would have just another slippery slope. We probably wouldn't have gotten to World War II. It might have disintegrated because, I mean, Röhm was a powerful figure, but then what about Himmler and Göring and Heydrich? Were they just going to give up? Himmler and Röhm were good friends. Röhm was the one that got Himmler in the SA to begin with. Himmler started in the SA, and then he got groomed to the SS. So a lot of the SS men were former SA men, and they were literally standing in the late 20s and early 30s poaching people from each other's recruitment offices. You don't want to join them. You want to join over here. We have the cool uniforms. So it was inevitable. If Röhm didn't want to take a back seat, it was the only choice. So that's the
no, it's good because that's actually, it's a complicated part of the story, I think, because when you study World War II, of course, you keep having to go further and further back to understand the context of things, which is pretty common in history.
Well, to understand exactly what if the interesting point is the Franco-Prussian War in the 1850s. The Prussians wanted to do a German federation with free trade and no taxes between the borders, and literally the precursor to the EU concept started in the 1850s. So you can take everything this was a German idea 100 years before the Nazis ever showed up and came up with it. So yeah, everything dates a lot further back than people think.
Yeah. Well, can it be said that the SA basically evolved from the Freikorps? A lot of the Freikorps people ended up becoming the SA, or are they really two separate things?
No, you could certainly say they did. The Freikorps were... What do you do if you're a soldier and you no longer have anything to fight for? If there's a fight, well, that's what you know, so you go fight. And that's what they did. And a lot of them, then they came back. I mean, Rommel was in the Freikorps. A lot of them was in the Freikorps because they were career soldiers. And after Treaty of Versailles, they could only have 100,000 man army, which they circumvented in a lot of ways, especially with all these little paramilitary organizations. So a lot of them ended up in the SA as only natural, and a lot of them then ended up in the SS.
Yeah,
and a lot of them then continued and went back in the German army when they could, because they had kept up their experience.
and it's something to see the Freikorps when you see their equipment and you see the Freikorps. We oftentimes think that the Death's Head was, started with the SS, but no, I mean, it's been all through history, but the Freikorps were out there with the Death's Head, and they were like, we're going to go get these commies.
That was the old Prussian cavalry.
Yeah.
The Death's Head was way, that go way back. That was von Mackensen's. It was the old Prussian artillery cavalry. And I always thought from World War I, von Mackensen, Field Marshal Mackensen, he was the coolest guy with his big mustache and his big
Death's Head. Yeah, he was.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah. That's definitely. I'll have to attach a picture of that to the show, because that guy, I mean, he might be the most badass looking soldier that has ever lived.
And he was. He was just the one that. It's funny because even in World War II, there was a handful of guys that you could always count on. Bring in your men and you'll fix the problem. Mackensen was the World War I equivalent. This is going downhill fast. Get Mackensen, get him in there. And he went there and he would fix the problem. There's just sometimes you could just get this diehard's image of a soldier who just get things done. The pattern, we're just going to get things done. No matter what, he will fix it. And Mackensen was definitely one of them. And it's just, we all great commanders. They are just. Yeah. I think that's probably what we're missing today. We need a great commanders who get things done. But I don't know if Mackensen would have been a great politician, but he certainly was a great soldier.
Yeah, I think you need great military leaders, then probably great political leaders. Because they're two different things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Although so, I do think politicians probably should. No, I do think that most ranking politicians should serve in the military.
That'd be good.
Well, maybe give it a little common sense and maybe realize what actually happens when you send dudes off with a gun.
Yeah. Oh. Yeah. And as I mentioned, Patrick Huzman. I'm sorry, I'm going to screw up your last name, but Patrick Huzman. He said that the Stalin, the word that they came up with for the Ukrainian farmers was kulaks. Those guys who are, since they can't afford to pay all the taxes that we want, which is basically all their grain and their seed grain, they're bad, and we have to go, kill them.
Yeah. I mean, and if you want to talk about where the Germans lost the war, when half of the Eastern population saw the Germans as liberators from Stalin, should probably have embraced that part.
I always thought, the problem with Nazis is they were Nazis, right? That's one of the issues that they had. They, this whole killing people, that's the thing, right? If they could have, been a little bit more, I don't know, like, I'm okay, you're okay. If when they'd gone east, if they'd said, hey guys, like, here's a pack of cigarettes, some money, some food, and a rifle. Do you want to just head east with us and kill everything? It'd have been done.
Absolutely. And then everyone that were ahead in front of them going like, oh, wait, we can join them as opposed to this guy?
Yeah.
I mean,
exactly. It had been over. It would have been over in the time that they originally thought it would have been.
That's the problem with the revolution is there's very few exemptions in a revolution. It is sort of all-compassing. There are no deals to be made. It's like either we don't want you, so we don't want you. There's not the savvy of, let's be smart about this. Yes, it's like my scorpion's problem is that he's a scorpion.
Yeah, exactly. He's not really a touchy-feely kind of reptile.
He's not an emotional kind of scorpion.
He's kind of limited in his reaction to life.
I don't know what you are, so I'm just going to bite you.
Yeah, exactly. I sting things, whatever they are. Yeah. In episode 7, The Last Nazi Secret, the Henge. The Henge is cool. Everybody likes it. Connections, episode 7. So you mentioned something. I'm breaking all my own rules, but I want to see what's in there. And that's something I found really inspiring because it reminded me of someone we've had on the show before, Robert Young Pelton. And he's kind of known as the adventurist. And some of the little if I can find him here, rules for life that he laid down in all of his travels to the world's most dangerous places.
I know. I did personal protection for years. I always read his books.
Yes.
The World's Deadliest Places.
Yes.
That was sort of the Bible. Whenever anybody want to go on vacation, you want to like, no, don't want to go there.
Yeah. Well, you remind me. It's the thing is, so I was thinking, if there was a title, you're kind of like so he was an adventurist. So you're kind of like historian adventurist, because like some of his sort of things that he noticed were. And I actually interviewed him, and we talked about this stuff. It's things he mentioned. Yeah, I interviewed Robbie Young Pelton twice.
He's still around, isn't he?
He's still alive. Yeah, and he said three insights he's gotten on life. We are losing the love of risk. We are letting fear prevent us from being great.
Yes.
And he also said, never confuse what you are afraid of with what can kill you.
Yes.
And he said, if you fear failure, you've already lost.
Yes.
And so he's known as that was like, we call that interview, the mindset of an adventurist. And so he kind of considers himself, he got labeled the adventurist. So with what you're doing, and hopefully we have time to get into a little bit of it, is with your going into these massive underground fortresses, the endless tunnels, and what the Germans built during the war that many people don't even know exists. You're really taking risks in some of these places you're climbing through. So I look at it like you're kind of, what makes the show great is that you're a historian adventurist, or like an adventurous historian. You're actually taking risks, doing somewhat crazy things to bring that history to life.
I never said I was smart, did I?
I'm not sure if many courageous people are. So.
Well, let's go tickle the landmine. I appreciate the comparison to Pendleton, because he's just such a great guy, and he went to the most dangerous places in the world and hung out with the most crazy psychotic warlords in the world. And I wish he still wrote.
I wish he did.
Most Daedalus Places, because he really set the bar for. That was the book every reporter, everybody read. All respect to that man. If you want, I want to have a cigar with somebody. I would love to be with him. Well, starting backwards, the way I look at it. And not to do the sob, sad, teary-eyed country western song story, but I really don't have any family left, and my dog is dead. So, if not me, what have I got to lose? I don't have any kids. Don't have this. I think I got a will somewhere too. So if I don't come back from a tunnel, I guess I'll be okay. I don't take stupid risks. Although I did piss off a Polish general that I need to apologize to, because otherwise I might not come back for other reasons. Translating error. But I think we got to look at these places and go like, well, what's the worst thing that can happen? I think you really need to look at that in life and really, what decision you make. And like I spend a lot of I wrote books for women on how to stay safe, and we're back to the common sense of like, what's the worst thing that's going to happen if I do this? Okay, I crawl around on some military area. If I step on a landmine, well, I won't know, will I? So we don't have to worry about that part. If I get arrested for trespassing, I'll get a ticket and a fine, or some military police officer will yell at me incessantly in the language I don't understand for some amount of time, and then run me off base. What's the worst that's going to happen? I mean, I'm not in like trespassing in the Taliban's backyard. I won't get shot. Mm-hmm. So you got to look at what. So if the worst thing that's going to happen is you get a trespassing ticket,
yeah.
All right, okay, it's not worth it compared to the fact that something extremely historically important might be hiding on the other side of that fence. And there are videos that I have not published of the part of me crawling around in the underground, not getting discovered by the military patrol that may or may not have pinged in on the fact that I'm using my phone as a GPS. Well, the hell would I try to sneak in on a communication center anyway? So if I can't sneak in and find what I'm looking, there's some of these places that are really well guarded and will scramble your GPS signal so you can't actually find where the hell you're going. That's a bit of a problem I found in certain places that shall not be mentioned, because I'm still trying to get permission to go to the front door, since I apparently can't find it through the back door. But, you know, if you know there are places that will not show you, well, I mean, we all want to see what's in there, don't we? And so I guess, well, I'll give it a shot. If I have an idea, I'll give it a shot. I was more worried when I was wandering around the top of one of the Riesa mountains, and there was one of my friends, he texted me like, "Oh, by the way, do you know there are really large wolves up there?" Like, oh, no, but thanks for telling me. What, do I have a wolf repellent? I speak dog, so I'd figure it out. But that's probably a bigger problem. And the tunnels, you know, you try to be smart. I have a little. You pretend to be smart. Like, I have a helmet. It's always in the car. I have a little oxygen container. But if I go into, and you know how it is, if you go into a place with no oxygen, you're not going to know. You're just going to pass out. But I have it with me. And I usually text somebody before I go somewhere. As like, by the way, this is my coordinate. This is where I'm going. Although if you're in the middle of nowhere, Poland, and the closest person you know is in Berlin, well, you know, I mean, you know, you try to take precautions, or you try to bring people with you that, you know, have been or have, so you can at least be mutually supportive. But when George and Jonas tell, he said, well, there's a 30-meter drop and down here, and the fire department keep pulling people out, and it's really hard to get in and out. I'm like, all right, I'll take that as a hint. All right, fine. Not as much because I have a problem getting in there or think I'll be rescued. It's more because to get the mountain rescue and the fire department in Germany to pull me out, I get saddled with the bill. And I'm not entirely sure a GoFundMe campaign will take care of that, because that's an expensive bill. So a little preparation and longer rope ladders may be a thing. But I think we all need to look at life and go like, well, what's the worst that's going to happen? Because a lot of times, and you know, especially if you're a teenager and you're young, everything is the worst thing that will ever happen to you ever. And you're going to like, no, things could be a lot worse than her not showing up for a second date, dude. There are worse things in life. Not passing that exam, there are worse things that'll happen down the line, trust me. And you know how it is. In life, as you get older, you accumulate some trauma and some pain and some sad memories and losses, because we lose people we love as we get older. It is heartbreaks that'll always stay with us. And a lot of times we spend a large part of our lives. I spend a large part of my life taking care of my mom or my dog. And with them both gone, that sounds kind of sad, but with them, I have no more responsibilities. And unless some playmate picks me up tomorrow and buys me a dog, I have no responsibilities. And this is the time I can go and I can travel. And because I understand if I were to one day end up with a family, of course, family is a priority. Now you have responsibility and you have to live up to that. If you have kids, you live up to that responsibility and you take care of your damn kids. Get a dog, you take care of your dog because you chose to have that responsibility. And lecture to the younger generation that responsibilities are not things you just take and give away when they no longer suit you. So right now, I'm free to go to these places and explore them and bring them to people who can't go. And I think that's, besides it being really fun for me. Oh yeah, that was where I was going. This is really fun for me.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things that I'm reminded of when you're saying that is it's something that actually Les Stroud, Survivor Man, said. When you're going out there and you're doing something extraordinary and you're documenting it, you have to realize that you are some people's ability to adventure.
Yeah.
And that's okay, because there are those who are strapped with the responsibility. They're 9 to 5. They're like wearing that yoke.
Thank God for that.
Yeah. So there's people who they they're like that oxen that's kind of pulling the wagon across Death Valley.
I mean, if the world was full of Muppets like me, I mean, holy hell.
Yeah.
It might be fun for a while, but sooner or later we'd run out of things.
No, exactly. And so for those people who are, making the ball bearings and going to, the 9 to 5 or self-employed, whatever they're doing, no, I think it's incredibly important, like with the with the content you're putting out, because that is, like I say, that is some people's ability to adventure, and they actually get to do it, and they wouldn't have otherwise. I mean, and I don't think that there's nothing wrong with those people who are watching it, because we can't, we might have our own adventures that we're doing. We're going, I'm going to go and like one thing I've always had a real interest in was kind of something similar, but actually studying mercenaries through time, because mercenaries have been with us forever. That's some great stuff there. So maybe I'm out doing my adventure, bringing the history of mercenaries to people. We can do our own adventure, but there's so many other adventures that we're going to miss if we don't simply, watch your content or other content too, of course.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that it is important, because we cannot all be everywhere, but at certain times we can all sit and revolve in front of a screen and see what's out there. So we have to show each other what's out there, and I think that there's this is a good way of doing it. And also trying to tell a story, but sometimes just walking through these places like History Hunter does is great, because you get to go find ideas and inspirations, and you can also it can be an escape. History sometimes can be an escape from present, and sometimes the present needs a little bit of escaping from. And not everyone can't go everywhere, so this is a good way of us all coming together over an adventure. I'm just the Muppet with the wet boots, and I'm good with that.
Oh, it's great. Yeah. Well, let's see. I got some other stuff I don't want to, I mean, I figure we've been talking for like an hour and 26. Probably, I'm sure we'll both be worn out at 2 hours probably. So that's a good spot to, not go past possibly. I mean, I can go forever, but, here's one. I'll ask you some questions that, I'm not going to say are easy, but definitely are going to be interesting to people. Uncommon WW2, German nuke knowledge. Germany had nukes before the end of World War II. A lot of people don't know that. And there's one thing, and this is something that I read. This is right out of Mr. Farrell's book.
Yes,
Nazi International. What do you think of this? I mean, Nazi and the American effort. Well, he didn't say this, but Nazi and the American effort to nuked Japan. So Martin Bormann and hopefully I have this right. Kamla, and Martin Bormann sent a sub 234 Norfolk several weeks after the European war ended. Uranium and infrared proximity detonators, along with the scientists that created the detonators, and also a Messerschmitt 262 was on board. So it looks like Bormann and Kamla, at the end of World War II, maybe that was like their deal to be able to, escape that situation. But beyond that, if that story if that's true, if there was uranium and the infrared detonators and the scientists, etc., we were working on the Manhattan Project, but we didn't have the uranium, we didn't have the detonators. So if all that history is true, then it could be stated that like it really was the nukes that were dropped on Japan, that was really kind of a Nazi-American joint venture. Well, what manner of speaking,
Yeah. Well, what you have is a couple of different interesting components. It has never officially been, has not yet been officially accepted that the Germany tested nuclear devices. From everything I've seen, I am as close to 100% as I can get without actually having the fragments of it, sure that the Germans tested several nuclear weapons of some sort, of some yield, probably a smaller tactical nuclear device in Jonastal, possibly something bigger in Ludwigslust. That's from eyewitness testimony, a lot of eyewitness testimony, credible eyewitness testimony, and just from looking at what was captured after the war, especially by the Russians, that everybody tried to get stuff away from. The entire Russian nuclear program, first nuclear reactor, was all fueled by German found uranium. So it's not like they didn't have enriched uranium. And we've always been told, the official stories, that Germany didn't make a bomb, they couldn't make a bomb, the nuclear project wasn't good enough. And yet, you could look at 300 tons of fissionable various radioactive materials captured by the Russians. 7 tons of metallic uranium was captured by the Russians. That was what the Russians got. And we know the Germans wanted to get stuff away from the Russians, at least into the sphere of the Americans, because I am as certain as I could that a deal was done. Dulles, Kammler, Bormann, possibly Himmler had some involvement, of the top SS. And this is the point where the SS runs the show, and they oversee these special programs and have access to these special programs. Martin Bormann was the financier of the Reichsjus, Hitler's secretary, not the secretary that files the paperwork and that writes the letters, the one who actually makes things happen. And at the end of the war, they packed a submarine 234 with uranium. And this is I think, was 2,000 pounds of yellow cake uranium, the ME-262 Luftwaffe general, and a lot of blueprints of Kammler's pet projects. And there was also the 2 Japanese officers on board, because ostensibly it was supposed to go back to Japan. It left towards the end of the war, and it wasn't sunk or hailed by Allied aircraft. It disappeared for 16 days before it showed up, closing in and ending up in Norfolk. The Canadian Navy hailed it, and the U.S. Navy destroyer, that I don't remember the name of, jammed that signal and flashed him to follow. So the submarine ended up in Norfolk. There's photos of that. And Carter Heydrich's book outlines the shipping manifest, and the uranium was in gold-lined canisters. It's all verified. It was there. If there was more than that, that we don't know. The infrared proximity sensors and the developer Heinz Schlickert, the guy that devised them, that created them, he was debriefed by Dr. Alvarez, or a Mr. Alvarez. He debriefed him in the Pentagon. And interestingly enough, there's Luis Alvarez of the Manhattan Project. He got a Nobel Prize for solving the detonation problem with the bomb that dropped over Nagasaki. Coincidental? Come on now. But and it gets better than that. When you look at the Alsos teams that were sent out at the end of the war, they had some 150 some people, were sent out to scour Germany for their nuclear secrets and obtain the nuclear scientists and materialists and whatever. And the Alsos teams put out a report that they're the ones that put out the report that Germany didn't have anything, they couldn't do anything, their backwards program, yada, yada, yada. And they actually put out that statement while they were still in Strasbourg. They hadn't even entered Germany proper. The Alsos teams went to Jonastal and to Stadtilm, where Kurt Diebner was the premier nuclear scientist looking to build a bomb. I don't think Heisenberg was really trying to build a bomb, and Heisenberg was more a theoretical physicist, where Diebner was the practical. He was looking for an application, and he was working with the Heereswaffenamt, the German military, to build a bomb. He was looking for, they were both Erich Schumann, who was the head of the German army's Heereswaffenamt, and Diebner. They joined the Nazi party early on, where Heisenberg was at odds with Himmler, to the point where Heisenberg's mom had to talk to Himmler's mom to kind of get the SS to lay off. So Heisenberg was never really highly popular by the SS, who was running this show, or by Himmler, which makes it hard to believe that they were going to put their bet on him. They had their own. They worked with the army as well. And I think they tested this in Jonastal down in Thüringen, where there's these tests that at least one that we know of was tested. And something was tested, because it was witnessed, it was in the Russian archives, by detail to Stalin, by report of how this test took place, how they carried it in, how it was detonated so far above ground, There was Germans in the area that saw it. The SS doctors were incredibly busy the days after. People had nosebleeds, headaches. There was bodies of prisoners that had been exposed and had been burned. And there's everything indication. Plus, the Alsos teams went straight to Jonasthal. Diebner moved from outside Berlin. He had the original reactor that I have in the episode, the season premiere on the second season, which I'm re-uploading today, as a matter of fact, for various reasons, where I go to the Gotthard reactor, and he moved to Stadt Ilm, which is in Thüringen, and set up a reactor there, which is coming up another episode. And no one really seemed to bother that there's a nuclear reactor in this little small town. It's not in any of the papers. No one's talking about it, but it was there. And the Alsos team recovered some cubes there as well. This is 15 kilometers, but 10 clicks away from the test site at Jonasthal, where they tested that nuclear device, which is a huge German proving grounds where a lot of things took place and happened, and you still can't get into today. The Alsos teams went there, and they wrote back to the general, whose name I cannot for the life of me remember right now, which is not important, that they found a treasure trove of something. And was a fat boy that required 54 kilograms of uranium in order to work. And the Americans in February only had 7 kilograms of enriched uranium, and they could only make about 6 kilograms a month. So the Manhattan Project seemingly did not have enough uranium for the 2 bombs and one to be tested until getting into 1946, until the end of the war, when everybody went to Jonasthal, they went to Diebner's lab, and you would think, had a deal been done, Kammler, General Wolf, Himmler, Dulles, certainly they were in connection. Schellenberg was in connection with Dulles. He went to Switzerland quite often, Schellenberg. Dulles was in Switzerland. All these people were in the SS or Dulles. A deal were done. Something was handed over. It is almost impossible to think otherwise, especially considering all these Germans that sort of disappeared not in paperclip, but disappeared under the CIA umbrella. Like Klaus Barbie ended up working for the CIA for a decade or two in Bolivia. And you had the banker that worked with the SS. He ended up setting up part of the German intelligence network after the war. So all these things tie together, and all these people are verified working together immediately after the war. And the Alsos teams report that the Germans didn't have anything and couldn't do anything. Well, that makes sense. Number one, we don't want to admit that the Germans beat us to it, although you'd think at this point in time, they didn't beat us to it in the battlefield, and we still won the war. So, and they had enough fissional material. We can't even find the cubes that Heisenberg used to make his experiments in Heikelok. And Diebner had a reactor that was identical, and there was the Gotthard reactor as well. So how many more reactors were there in Germany that were experimental and were running, or they were working with? There was 11 different entities within Nazi Germany as a sphere that was working on a nuclear weapon. Yeah, but we only heard about Heisenberg because Heisenberg failed. Heisenberg is hailed because he failed, and he said he failed and he didn't want to try, and he's sort of the anti-Nazi German scientist. Nobody knows about Diebner in the mainstream, and he's probably one of the most important people there is. Diebner's, after the war in 1947, 2 years after, he came out and patented a nuclear propulsion system for large cargo ships. In 1955, and he founded the nuclear propulsion organization for transport of civilian ships, whatever it translates to. And in 1955, the first German tanker ship ever that was run with a nuclear reactor was Diebner's. What do you think? He sat after the war and came up with, I guess we could have done that. He figured out to make this work during the war, and he patented it a couple of years after. Schumann tried to write a book about it, but the British wouldn't publish it. And you're looking at these small little nuclear reactors we all of a sudden had in all our submarines, all these small portable reactors. The nuclear reactors Germans did were very, very small. and there's very little backup around them. There's no power plants, there's no running water, there's not all the things you see. But then again, you look at the Chicago pile. That was very built out of the Tribune of the sports stand, out of the University of Chicago. It was very small, encased in wood. So these small nuclear reactors, they were there, and they were a lot easier to put up here and there than you'd think of it today. So there's no reason to think it didn't work. There's all the circumstantial evidence that it worked. And the cargo manifest of the 234 submarine, well, that most certainly documents that everything was in there. I think even one or two of the canisters are on display out in Alabama.
Really? That'd be something.
I seem to remember seeing a photo from there. I wanted to go there last year and to go to do an interview, but no, we can't meet people because,
Oh, yeah.
So, all right, we'll go back on that one. So, well, where's the infrared proximity sensors? I'd like to see those that the manifest said, but, things disappear.
Mm-hmm.
But all of a sudden, like I said, America all of a sudden have enough fission material to make 3 bombs work. And it happened. It just, we're back to the coincidence part. And I think it's very likely that submarine that was not hailed, not sunk, possibly could have, one thing, facilitated Borman or others' departure, because it disappeared in enough time that it could have gone by the Canary Islands, dropped somebody off. That's why that was one of the Hitler escape theories, and then went back on track up to Norfolk. So they knew where they were going. The captain knew where they're going. The log is not correct. They actually released the log, and it was a complete forgery. So it was not even the captain's handwriting.
Yeah, that is
the front cover, but everything inside. So I mean, it just smells.
Yeah, that'd be so interesting to see those, if they still exist, the log books of the ships that were around the area, because I think especially when there was rumor that the Germans could reach, eastern cities with maybe a V1, bomb and such like that. Even though I don't know if they were quite there yet in doing that, they certainly had the they were working on shooting off that what was it? A certain kind of there was the Nubel. I always scripted the pronunciation, like the Nubelwerfer. They were like working on shooting that off of a sub and things like that. But so could the Germans really have reached before the end of the war, an eastern city with a V1? Well, whether they could or not, there was a fear of that. And so in a sense, for that sub to have made it, because it was really, I mean, we were patrolling the crap out of the sea towards the end of the war. And so, yeah, that sub would have had to, it would have had to been, guided all the way, or else it would have gotten bombed.
It didn't pop up and give up until the war had officially ended in Europe.
Gotcha.
I think it was 14 May or something. It turned up around here. The V1 wouldn't have gotten anywhere. The V2, there were trials with V2 rockets towed off a platform floating after a submarine, which was, well, I don't know. No, that stopped in 1942, 43. They did fire rockets from submerged submarines. The small Nebelwerfer rockets were fired off submarine. Which was really cool because it looks exactly the same as a ballistic today. But the whole thought that the Germans didn't have a long-range bomber, and they didn't, but the Condor still made it over New York and took pictures and back again. So they could have gone to New York and dropped something with a whole lot of luck and the wind in the back and so on. And a lot of people, they ask me, well, if the Germans did have a functioning nuclear weapon, why didn't they use it? And I think the problem was always, they had this working in early, I think the first official test was October 3rd over Ludwigslust. That was witnessed by pilot Hans Sinzer. So that was 44. So late 44, working on something smaller, tested that in March 45. Both 44 and 45, everyone knows the war is lost. And unless you have a lot of nuclear weapons to drop on everybody advancing on your territory, if you bomb New York with a nuclear bomb, that's going to piss off a whole lot of Americans. We knew how that went 9/11. Didn't go well. Hell, it didn't go well for anyone. But that was, even the Germans knew this is not a way to go. Bomb London? Well, London, they've been bombing with everything forever, and that didn't really nothing good would come of that. Moscow, better idea. Advancing Russian armies, that would be the safest bet to start fighting them. So now you're looking at, they continuously tried to perfect the V2 guidance system. And they made some headway on that, but I always saw the V2 as a test bed with a 1-ton warhead for a weapon of mass destruction. And the Germans, if they had a functioning bomb towards the end of the war, it was still too little and it was too late. You can start lobbing it. How you need a lot of them, because you need, and where are you going? Where are you going to aim? What are you going to hit? And who are you going to piss off doing this? You're still surrounded by millions of soldiers coming from all sides. You can't hit them all. Hit their capitals will piss them all off even more. And then there definitely won't be a deal for the top Nazi leadership or SS leadership that wants to make a deal. And even Dulles wouldn't have been able to sell, yeah, we need to have these people help us if they nuke New York or some allied city. So it was much better. We made it work. Let's give them the bomb and give them our plans and do a deal that way. Or some of it that I also am pretty sure was buried. And I think they buried a lot in caves. They hid a lot. And that's one of the things that so you put up an episode and you do the voiceover and then you hear your voiceover and go like, I should have said that. I should have said this. So now I know. I said that the Americans were literally, their shots were exchanged between Russians and American troops. Yes. In places like Linz outside the Bergkristall tunnels, where the Americans were trying to haul everything out of importance before they had to give it to the Russians. Now, the Germans obviously buried some stuff before the Americans got there. Even von Braun and Dornberger, they hid all their documents for several days in a cave not far from Nordhausen until they were sure they actually had a deal with the Allies. So obviously, Bormann crowd, Kammler crowd would have hidden stuff as well. And I think that was one of the things Kammler was so busy doing in the last days of the war, was hiding stuff. He couldn't get it away from the advancing Russians or in where the Americans would get, so they had to hide it. Some of them probably didn't live long enough. They were killed at the end, fighting, have you, or they couldn't get a deal. So it was still there. And there are things buried in the ground in some of these places. I think that we're all looking for. And Himmler's adjutant, Grothmann, he said that there was so many, in Jonastal, there were so many pre-existing mines and caves that a lot of times they didn't have to build new tunnels. So they just connected some of the things that are already underground. Great place to hide things. I just have to fill it up. And which is completely unexplored again in Jonastal. You had 30,000 prisoners building these 27 small little pithy tunnels. And the Alsace teams, there was stuff that was transported from the Berlin area. And this is interesting. In Berlin, outside Berlin, you had Gottorf, the nuclear reactor. You have Kummersdorf, the proving ground. And you had, not far, you had the production of radioactive materials. There was crates and trucks and deliveries made to the Jonastal, one of the tunnels out by Jonastal, not one of the 27 in the mountain, but another one that I quite frankly haven't quite figured out where it is yet, because it was blown up. That was filled up with crates that came out of the Berlin area all the way up until early March. And they were booby-trapped, and all sorts of things was done to keep this tunnel and whatever was in these boxes, supposedly government-sensitive, whatever. These boxes were removed by the Alsace team. And then the tunnel was blown up by the Americans before the Russians got there. We don't know what was in these boxes. And the Germans hid things all over the place. Some of them were found. We even snuck across the demarcation line into Czechia in 1947 on a tip-off from an ex-SS officer that he had hidden some of Kammler's documents in Stressovice. I was there. That's coming. I'll show you. And they were it was so heavily booby-trapped. And I've been to that place. It was done in a hurry, and in a little ravine. They dug in a tunnel, reinforced it, stuck some crates in there, booby trapped it 10 ways from Sunday. And so they brought a bomb team in. The bomb team was detained, but the 32 crates they recovered from Slezvica in Czechia made it out. And then they had to return it in exchange to get the bomb team freed. And then it turned into, oh, well, this was all documents about Czechoslovakian collaborators and pieces of art, which is not even something I'm remotely buying, because you're not going to risk all that for even if you sort of think, what does he care about collaborators? And he was in the area, and I've working on putting all that together, but I've been to these places, I've seen them, and the crates that the Americans gave back existed, but who says it was the original content? So we know that the Americans have at least several stashes of things that disappeared, and one was taken by the Alsace teams, could very easily have contained uranium and what have you, because it came out of that area of Berlin. So certainly deals have done. Whether we can find these, there's been historians that have found underground caves out in Thuringia where there were things that looked like nuclear bombs from the GPR images that was done by Peter Lohr and Christine Flocker, and they wrote a book about it. And then they came back. It was a big news story. Nuclear bombs under these tunnels. So right here, the news were there, the media was there, the police and the local mayor. And what's the local mayor going to do? So they eventually sent him home and said, "You're crazy. There's nothing there." And you see those images in the book, and they're just, there's something there, something metallic there. Then he went back after a while, and the ground had been disturbed, and all the tunnels were empty. He scanned the whole place again. Everything had been destroyed. They had been blown up from the inside. So somebody went there in the middle of the night and pulled out whatever was in there and blew up the tunnels, which has to be either it was 2016, so it has to be German or American military. But it must be somebody who had some idea what they were doing, because it was fast and it was discreet, and no one saw that happening. And strange things are really going on in that area out there. And I think we're all hoping that one day we'll find that wall into that cave where there's something that they haven't found. And I've always said, well, I'm still serving in the Guard, so I try to be nice. And I don't know how my general will react if I got arrested by the Germans. But you know what the problem is? Knowing how this gets covered up, and since there's typically Austria, Germany, Poland, Czechia, no, you can't. There's nothing there, but you can't look.
Mm-hmm.
No. I'm sick of that explanation. If there's nothing there, you let me look. And there are places like that has been identified, that's been found, that's been partially excavated, especially like the Austrian historian, who I know, and for the life of me, I can't remember his name right now. Andreas Sulze. He found from aerial photographs a huge octagon bunker. He found entrances to tunnels, was shut down immediately by the Austrian government. And then the place over the weekend was declared for preserve, which is complete horse dung. And there's something there, and they know there's something there. Whether they know what, they may not know what's there, but they know that they don't want us to know. And that's just infuriating. And this is one of the things I want to do with this series is see if I can generate enough of an outcry by presenting everybody's information, all the historians working on this. This is what everybody found. This is how clear it is that there's something there. Don't you want to know? If the politicians know, the law say no. There's always some National Forest Commission that keeps saying no, and I doubt they even know why.
Why? I don't know why. Mm-hmm.
So you have to take it to the population of that country. So don't you want to know? Some of them are going to say no, because, especially in Austria, because, poor Austrians, they're all invaded. They didn't do it. Have nothing to do with it.
Well, and in your series, one of the things that definitely, especially, the Nazi secret, we hear a lot about DUMBs now, deep underground military bases. And that goes into, I won't even get into the modern day version, because I'm not going to call it conspiracy, but there's supposedly massive, underground bases that have been built, recently.
Yeah, that's the impression I've been having.
Yeah, and so there's a lot of that you hear. And maybe not. Maybe we have submarines that go into the side of the continent, into the bases, whatever. It's all cool. But the thing about it is, when you hear that, you realize that, well, hey guys, this whole like deep underground military base thing, it's old school. I mean, the Germans were
Yeah.
doing it during the war, and I don't think one of the things that your work is bringing to light, because I did not know, I had no idea what was done underground and how fast massive facilities were made. And of course, we don't even know where they all are.
No. And the interesting thing is some of the people that built them ended up over here building our missile underground facilities. We thought it was all the rocket scientists come out and go like, no. Like Fiebinger, the Austrian engineer who built so many of Kamla's tunnels from turnkey solutions. Hire Fiebinger, he'll do everything, even the waterworks and the rail system. And he did, and then we hired him after the war, and he came over here and he assisted in our underground facilities. And the Germans knew exactly how to do this. And it's actually interesting because I did a little episode on Hitler's bunkers a couple of days ago. I kind of just wanted to show what the different ones look like, just to show that this has nothing to do with what Kamla was doing. And the most interesting of all the Hitler's constructions was the Kehlstein house, was the tea house. Because all the technology used and learned in 1937, 38, the Kehlstein house was a little tea house that was built on top of a rock outcropping in one of the Alps. And there was nothing there to begin with. So they had to build the road, they had to build the tunnels through the mountains to get to the road. They had to build the tunnel into the mountain and then the shaft up for the elevator. And then they had to build this house on top of an outcropping in the middle of nowhere and transport everything from pressure air to water, had to 1,300 workers, had to be put up an account, they have to be closed, fed, housed, everybody got paid. But all the technology was new. All this innovation that went into building this little tea house is pretty much what Kamla would need to know to build half of what he was building. And interestingly, a lot of architectural firms had their people volunteer to work on the Kehlstein house for free, because everybody came in and joined. They wanted the help, and the local farmers helped. So you have all these different engineers and architects around the country volunteering to work on this to see how this worked. I'm not saying that was a pre-war construction plan to teach the Germans how to do things, because I mean, professional miners, they know. But what this resulted in was the Germans knew exactly. You build into you need how much, you need these tunnels in this mountain. This mountain is made of sandstone. I'm going to need so many laborers. I'm going to need this much to build this. This is how long we're going to build per every day. This is how much rail we need. This is the reinforcement we need. This is the amount of laborers. This is how much they eat. This is how much they cost a day. This is how much skill. Everything was completely detailed. They knew exactly how much, how long, how far, how long it'll take when they started. And that's a lot of that expertise, of course, came over here. Even some of the very ugly part of it. And I think a lot of people they were really good at this. So of course we brought the expertise. And I know there's always been the argument about, well, morally, and morally is one of those things that's hard to put in context of life and death war. Because the moment World War II ended, that we're looking at the far bigger problem that we had helped create, which was the Soviet Union. And we had helped create them because we gave them a lot of equipment, a lot of trucks. If it hadn't been for American trucks, the Russian army wouldn't have made it to Berlin in the time they did. They don't like to talk about that, but that's still a fact. We sent them 750,000 trucks, lots of tanks and planes. So we created a new problem, a new dictatorship that is now wanting to do the same to Germany and the rest of Europe as Stalin and Lenin wanted to do in the 1919s.
Yeah.
And so we need our German allies now.
Yeah. And morally, well, yeah. The people who made money off of it, they had no moral problems with it. Yeah. And so the thing that gets me is there are some books, and I wish I could remember the titles right now. Some of them are on my bookcase, but there's some interesting, perspectives that we didn't know if Stalin was going to stop at Berlin. And I mean, there is at least, which I've seen in soldiers' journals and such like that the some of the German soldiers were not disarmed, and they were ready to fight with the Americans alongside of them with the Russians if the Russians didn't stop. So I think that's one of the reasons we met them where we did. We said, this is as far as you go, and we weren't sure. And the German troops were like, you mean you want us to keep our rifles? And they were like, yeah, just in case, you just hold tight there, because we might, we might have your back, right? And this is going to be a pretty badass battle if it happens.
It was a very interesting situation. It happened quite quickly. This is the sad thing about World War II is the people that bore the brunt of the fighting and the civilians that bore the brunt of the dying really had very little to do with the people who ran this war, funded it, or made money of all of it. Like you see, the how quickly Germany came back online as a European powerhouse after the war was in part due to all the German money that came back into the country that had been earned, made, stolen during the war. And again, we're back to people suffering, and the people who made money on it all got usually suspended sentences, maybe a year in jail here and there. And you're looking at the IG Farben, the AG, the Krupp, these people who profited from this. And it's interesting, and you can draw that parallel today. It's like who's in charge and who's profiting from everybody's hardship. Because I suppose that's not much different than the feudal lords, where you own nothing, we own everything, including you.
Yeah, and it really was a war. I guess probably every war has been the same, but really was a war. It may have had military strategic desires, like Hitler wanted to go east and have more land, and he wanted to get rid of the Bolsheviks. But at the same time, you had, Stalin did meet Hitler in Poland there. They both mass murdered their way across it. And it seemed like it really was a war of both military strategic goals, but also just an outright, two-front war of mass murder at the same time. Because both Hitler and Stalin, they were doing just plenty. I mean, you're right. It was the civilians. There may have been two militaries fighting, but they certainly were taking a lot of them. They're taking every civilian they could with them, or at least specific ones.
Yeah, it's the fighting you really didn't want to be caught up in, but you also it's interesting because with the Polish situation, for the leading up to the Polish invasion, Hitler had made overtures to the Polish. He wanted the Danzig corridor. He promised to build a freeway system and rail system through Poland, and it seemed from people around him and from what was written, he had statements he made at the time that he would have done an honest deal with the Poles, at least initially. But the Poles refused because the British had told them they would support them and stand by them, and they said that publicly. So, what happened then? Well, Germany said, well, we want this. We can't have it any other way. And Hitler took a gamble that Britain was not going to, because Britain hadn't done anything. Czechoslovakia had done anything before in any of the previous little campaigns for the Sudetenland or for the Anschluss in Austria. Everyone has sat on the sidelines. Now, British, they promised to support them. The French promised to support Poland with an invasion from the West. And the French did do a couple of, I think, a week incursion into Germany and kind of stopped and then turned around again. So they actually did a little mini invasion. But in actual fact, no one did a damn thing to help the Polish. And the moment the Russians then invaded from the other side, well, why did no one then declare war on Russia for doing the same thing Germany had just done? Well, that was not, according to Churchill and the British, although Churchill was not prime minister at the time. Well, no, there was only aggression from Germany. It wasn't from the Russians, which is ridiculous. Are you promising to fight for somebody's sovereignty or not? Oh, but the Russian. So clearly the British and the French had picked their enemy as being the Nazis, being the bigger evil than Russia. And then when they were defeated, well, then you had to deal with Russia. And then you had a Cold War that, interestingly enough, a lot of people made money off again. Yeah. Except for the poor people in the middle. And again, everyone on top of all of that, everyone in Poland just got run over again.
Yeah. two more things that I'd ask is, well, I could ask a lot of things, but we've been going on 2 hours. I would say that you do cover in one of your, I think it's a secret, Nazi Secrets episode 5. It's pretty cool. You talk about a lot of the rockets and such that they had. And it's amazing that during a war, I mean, a lot of it's while you're losing the war and getting bombed and making them underground. It is extraordinary. I mean, to me, it's one of the things that just drives me to study the history of it all so much, is that the stuff that Germany created while losing a war is phenomenal.
Oh yeah,
You had like your first analog computer was part of their missile program, you know.
XC3. Yeah.
Yeah, and you had the like the Fritz X. People can watch this. I'll link to it. But the Fritz X was wire guided, I believe.
The first tow missile, really.
First tow missile. And so you're thinking like the tow missile ain't new, you know. And you look at wire guided air to air, the X4. And I think it was the Heckel 29-3D was the very first kind of cruise missile with a that
with
they
a
actually
camera,
with a camera on the front. Yeah, and you're like,
there's one better. There's a better one that I haven't gotten to cover yet, which is just the Riesling shell. And I saw the effects because I wasn't, and that's where I got surprised, because in 1942 and 43 the Germans were testing an artillery shell that would penetrate 100 feet of dirt, 30 meters, into tunnels underground, detect the cavity, and then explode. Does that sound like something we're using today, but underground bunker busting bombs? Void detection in 1942-43. And I'm like, holy hell. And I went to the fort where they tested these things. They tested them several places on some of the old captured bunkers in Czechia and in Belgium and France. And it was 100 feet underground with these shells punched through reinforced, all the dirt, through all the reinforcement, the steel rebar, and some of them they tested with unexploding warheads, and some of them are still embedded in the walls. They fired hundreds of them. And you see these just came in, and you see where they exploded and just tore down the rooms way underground. And mind you, they hit them. They hit the tunnels with an artillery shell that was 30 meters underground. That in itself, I'm like, well, we can just practically we still do that today, but we thought it was kind of a new thing, right? The Germans really that was impressive to see. It really was. And you see so much of the munitions we have today, the infrared, the camera-guided bombs, wire-guided, the submerged launching of missiles from submarines. Well, it all started. I mean, we did our own research, and the British did theirs, but so much of it came out of Germany. And they miniaturized things. Things got smaller, to a degree that we really didn't keep up with here yet. So yeah, the technology is really, and I was so delighted that I could still walk into a place and see something that I didn't really know.
Yeah,
and that's what makes this fun. Is you're like, okay, so I have to go 100 feet down into this cold place. Great, what are you showing me? Holy hell! I haven't finished the episode yet. It'll come up because it's a place in Belgium that everybody needs to see. Fort Aubert.
That's something.
For that reason, it's just you see testing and you think about, well, I'm trying to figure out where they used this thing. Imagine if they had a void detection thing, the shell that could penetrate 3 meters of armor at the beginning of the war. Imagine no line. Goodbye.
Yeah, well, it makes me wonder. I mean, so much was created. It seems like if you want to really motivate technologies, just start bombing a country, and they'll get to it, because that seemed to work for Germany.
It works that way.
It's like, how can we get this GDP up? Well, start bombing shit.
Don't give them any ideas.
Don't give them any ideas.
It'll happen fast enough.
It's like we don't know.
We're dropping in the polls. We need to bomb something.
Yeah, it's exactly true. We don't know where these bombs are coming from, but man, the economy is going skyrocket. So, and when you were talking to Joseph Barrel recently, you did mention that the Japanese heard rumors that nukes were being used in Kursk. And so, we do wonder about these weapons, like which ones may have really been used, because it's always gotten to me about when the Germans were moving east, I understand, but especially while they were retreating, they were still inflicting massive casualties on the Russians. So you ask, when the Germans went east and they got pushed back, who really won and lost that war? Because the Russian casualties were massive. And what gets me is, I think you'd mentioned that the Nebelwerfer was also could be used as a fuel air bomb with like coal dust, etc.
Yes.
And it does seem that, I think you and just Farrell we were talking had gone into this a little bit. Maybe we don't know all that happened on the Eastern Front as far as the Russian casualties, because I've always wondered, and I come to wonder more and more. I mean, how are you going to talk that many soldiers into running into MG34 fire? It just seems like the casualties don't.
But it's interesting. That was the Russian doctrine all the way up. When I was in the academy, I talked typical NATO teachings of Russian doctrine was the first line has all the equipment, Russians and rifles and pack. The second line of attack does have their own personal equipment, but no rifles. The third wave of attack has no rifles, no equipment. They all pick up from the dead. So when you have an attack strategy that is deliberately designed so that only the first row are the ones who have everything, and the last row picks up from the dead, who wants to be in the first row? But if you're in a dictatorial regime and you're a dictatorial military, you don't get to make those choices for yourself. You get to go. And whether you're spurred up on patriotic fervor, or you have the NKVD promising to shoot you if you don't, you're going forward and hoping for the best. But if there's ever a time in life where you can say you don't want to be a Russian farmer, I guess World War II was definitely it, because they were sent forward in waves until the Germans ran out of ammunition, which is a really good reason. You also got to think about the was 1.3 million. There was millions of Russian prisoners of war that was captured in the early years by the Germans that couldn't be fed or wouldn't be fed, depending who and how that I haven't actually dived into that. But I don't think it was a surprise to most of the Germans in the army that we just have 1 million prisoners. We can't feed them. We don't know what to do with them. So they died. They were starved to death. And some of them, fortunately for them, ended up in some of the labor camps where they were put to work and fed a little bit. It's shitty story all around. But a lot of them died as well. So that adds to the numbers. You have the possible use of fuel air bombs. I could certainly see that have happened. Interestingly enough, now that the Russian archives have opened up over the past couple of decades, more information is coming out, and more Russian historians are starting to sort of dissect what happened, and a different point of view, more information is coming out. And I wanted to go to Russia. Well, I still want to go to Russia to actually talk to some of the Russian historians as to what they're actually finding and what we haven't been told. Because you're right, the numbers are exponentially high, but of course the tactics were also initially exponentially worse, and the Germans were better soldier than a Russian farmer that just had 4 weeks of training or 6 weeks of training, or non-calibrated tanks rolling out of the factory, and so on and so forth. They really were set up to be slaughtered by Stalin's tactics. They learned after the first year, as better, like the Siberian snow troops came in over at Moscow, but they learned, they got better. But it was a brutal war. And I always think the German soldier, especially initially, were a better soldier, a better tactician than the mass attacks you'd see on behalf of the Russians. And interestingly enough, the numbers of German soldiers on the Eastern Front, even though they suffered losses in 41, 42, and 42, 43, really didn't diminish that much, because they were replaced and replenished quite well. But of course, we're still looking at the end of the war, Russians had 16 million under arms. I think it was 10 or 16. Because one of the two, it doesn't matter, more than the Germans. I did an episode on it. At some point in time, you turn into Kelly Bundy, where some numbers come in and you forget others.
Yeah.
Blonde moment, I don't remember.
And somebody mentions here in the chat, Thomas Cooley, he mentions there's old footage of the Russian. I'm sorry. There's old footage of the Germans using overpressure charged coal air bombs against bombers. That'd be
Would
interesting.
you mind sending that to me?
Yeah, that'd be great. And that's one thing I know I haven't watched the chat really close. I've kind of watched it. I just get distracted if I do. But if people are
I know
watching
some
this,
of these names.
yeah, there's some
I know
great
some of these people.
there's some great arguments in there, and there's some good stuff. So there's good stuff in there. Definitely worth checking out too. Well, when it comes to the weapons of mass destruction,
David, you're right.
or like the fuel air bombs, something that gets me is, like I said, I read this in German. People, some people say these books are fake. Some people say they're real. I think they're real. Maybe I'm wrong. But
I kind of like that series, but I'll shut up because I know where you're going.
Oh, it's the what was it called? It's called a D-Day through German Eyes, and it's a book 1 and 2. And the first book was okay. The second book she wrote 10 years later because it was just a little bit edgy. Some of the stuff she didn't want to write at the time. There's an amazing Audible version. Each person recounting their tale. It's a different German person with the accent. Really makes it very, very cool to listen to if you want to listen to it.
I read it.
Yeah, and read it or read. You can read it too. You know, I have the book and I've read it.
I'll read it to myself with the German accent. It's much better.
It's like it sounds like Arnold Schwarzenegger. You know, it's like, and so one guy talked about they had some Goliaths, which are one of my favorite things that the Germans created during World War II, because the Goliath is like, what kid doesn't want a Goliath to drive around the neighborhood? You know,
my buddy has one.
It's one of your films, and it's just fantastic.
I know. It's kind of waiting for him to make that thing run. He's like connected up.
Oh, it's definitely something that I'd like to have in my garage restoring. That'd be really cool, you know.
I mean, it's not hard to build.
Oh, I guess you could just. I mean, if there's plans for it, I mean, you could just.
It's a box on little Caterpillar tracks with an electric engine or a diesel engine. Oh, yeah.
It's very true. Yeah, it's a pretty basic piece of machinery, huh?
A rocking chair. Never mind.
Yeah, it has like a rocking chair. Well, the thing is, he said in this book that they had, I think it was 2 or 3 of them, that they were going to run out on the beach on D-Day, and that they would release, fuel air mixture, and then they would ignite it. They were going to die when this happened because they couldn't get far enough away. But the idea was, if you just start blowing up the entire beaches, that would demoralize the troops on D-Day. And I'm not sure what it really would have achieved, but it definitely would have sent a message that maybe there's something bad over here you don't want any more of. But unfortunately, unfortunately for them, it didn't work. One fell over, and the whole thing just did not quite work right.
They got caught up in a pre-artillery strike because they had a battery of Nebelwerfer rockets set up to be fuel air bombs.
Really?
Some of them would scatter the fuel, and then every 6 rockets that would launch some seconds after would then ignite that mix, or the coal dust mix, or I think it was coal dust mixed with pressured air that would then disperse in the air. Then they would send in rockets to set that whole thing on fire. And coal dust works. It explodes significantly and deprives everything of oxygen. And that it wasn't as useful. They were initially stationed at Calais, and then they rolled throughout. As D-Day happened in Normandy, they rolled that way through, and it took them a couple of weeks to get there. So it was they were trying to target an Allied tank buildup for their next stage, because it wouldn't be that useful close to the coast. The close to the coast, it would be less useful because of the wind, the coastal winds that would scatter the powder, and they get caught in a preempted artillery strike completely. Probably by surprise. I don't think anybody knew they were there. And that's an interesting story. And I read some people say, yeah, that didn't happen. That's not true. And it isn't. I looked into it, and from what I could see, from what I looked at, it seems very, very much a legit story. And it would be very strange that it would seem strange to me if they didn't. Because the Nebelwerfer was a system, different size rockets, but it was reliable. It's been in use for the entire war. They knew the air fuel bomb mixture worked. They used it at Sevastopol. They would pump in air fuel mix into bunkers where the Russians wouldn't surrender, and then just ignite the damn thing. So for those two to not have been married and put into use, Eastern Front, and to be deployed, it would be strange to me if it hadn't happened. I don't think it would have made much of a difference because, I mean, we had some millions of guys landing on that beach already in England, and we weren't going to stop right there. I don't know exactly what it would have taken for us to go to a negotiated peace settlement.
No, yeah, even if there were fuel air bombs going off on the beach, it's well, you're just going to send more guys.
The same reason why the nuclear weapon at this point in time was, let's make friends, because they're not going to stop even if we nuke them. We take a couple thousand. That at that point in time, when we landed at the beaches, the war was lost for the Germans. It was lost for the Germans at maybe they could have turned it around at Stalingrad. Maybe they could have turned around. Hitler never wanted to go to Moscow. He wanted to go south of the oil field. Halder wanted to go to Moscow. The general staff wanted to go to Moscow. And they bitterly argued, and then they lied to Hitler about what they were actually doing. So I think that the whole Barbarossa idea, Stalin thought they were going south. That's what he thought. Oh, why are they coming to Moscow? That I would have gone down there. And that's what Hitler wanted to do. So a lot of circumstances.
Oh, a lot of strange things. It's like I always thought, well, if you just went into the Ukraine and just secured the resources there and then just said, this is ours, probably would work better.
That's what Hitler wanted to do. He said, no, hell with Moscow. He didn't want to go to Moscow. He wanted to go to the south and take Ukraine and the oil fields.
Yeah. What do I need potato farms for? I don't care. You know what I mean? Yeah. Stalin can have the Cossacks, whatever, you know. Well, as we wrap things up, I was going to just mention, and this is all covered in this book here, really well, if people are interested, Nazi Aficionado by Joseph P. Farrell. Yeah. And actually, I've interviewed him too. He's been on the show. We talked about, a bunch of stuff, basically how people are dumb now and they used to be smarter. That's what we talked about. And so, yeah. And
I was younger, not smarter.
Yeah, really. You know, Martin Bormann's moment. It was August 10th, 1944, as the Reich fell. What happened at the Hotel Maison Rouge? I probably said that wrong. And who were the players at the table? I think it's kind of a great way to wrap it up, because it always seemed to me so that if we want to call them the Nazis, it was like a submarine that kind of was on the surface. And then 1944 with Bormann in that meeting, that submarine, that U-boat went under the waves again. It just basically went out of sight, but it never really went away.
It's very interesting because towards the end of the war, the SS was pretty much running things. And as it comes to the military industry, work, labor, making money, to the point where Bormann came in and said he wanted 25. A lot of the Jews that was killed in the East and taken out of the processions went into the SS coffers. And it wasn't until 43 Bormann realized that the SS was making money he wasn't getting part of, so he demanded 25%. Not a lot of these people took money not for themselves, but for their party, for their cause. And Bormann saw the cause was lost in 44. And he had a meeting in Strasbourg in Maison Rouge in the hotel. And the only one who really wasn't there was IG Farben, because they were so big. You didn't really, and they were on board with the agenda as well. You didn't really need to tell them what to do. A lot of German industry, German industry was there. Bankers, financiers were there. You had people from the, let me see, what is it? I actually made a note of that, but I didn't, so never mind. There's a lot of industry, a lot of conspiracy back and forth, and a lot of obfuscation about that meeting. The interesting thing is it was verified that it took place by Wiesenthal himself. So if Simon Wiesenthal said it took place, then it probably did, because he was an intelligence operator before he became what we know him as. And so you had the people from the armaments industry, from the German industry, from the German banks. They were all there. It's a little unclear if Bormann was there himself or not, but that doesn't really matter. The order was clear to German industry: the war is lost, and assemble your resources, your patents, and distribute them out of the country to your affiliate companies outside of Germany, or make deals with foreign companies. Capital, patents, needs to leave. Germany will lose the war, and then you need to come back and help rebuild. And of course, and it's interesting because you had the two Germanys where the top leadership of the SS and Bormann, and smart people, and no matter what you think of them, a lot of them were very smart people, and they were not sitting there. The lower ranking that didn't have an overall picture, that is listening to Goebbels speeches and fighting at the front line, or just seeing their cities being bombed, they don't really know what the overall picture is. But the smart people on top, they did, and they knew the game was up. The war was lost. They need to plan for what was ever. The SS was not about Nazi Germany. The SS was about a way of life, about SS cities, about Germanic culture, about something far, far bigger than just Hitler and his party. And there could easily become a time where whenever it was time for Hitler to go or leave or be gone, if Heydrich had survived, he would certainly have been a contender for that job. The only one that really didn't want to be the new Führer was probably Himmler. I don't think he ever wanted to be in charge. He wanted to be the guy in the background, making sure Hitler was in charge. He was very, in that sense, very much of a loyal soldier. But there were ruthless people in the SS that were smart and motivated and driven. And had Heydrich survived, he would certainly have been the top contender to take over for Hitler at some point. But they were looking way past the war. In 43, 44, 45, they were writing memos of when the war is over, then we need this SS city. They had the NNAB look around for locations for SS cities of 10,000 people. They were decentralizing the command, the ministries, production, everything for the war effort on one hand, but also to relocate Germans who were like in Tyrol that they lost to the Italians. They were allies with the Italians. Those Germans were actually repatriated back into German cities, some of them in Czechoslovakia. It was a much bigger picture of a world picture of Germany that was run by the SS. And I think Bormann was smart enough to know that Hitler's time was up, and the next people that was in charge he was, again, businesses. Who runs the world? Business and bankers. So there's no way for a peace with Hitler in charge. Hitler will go. So who's the next one? What horse do I need to jump on now? The SS had all these contacts with all these business and all these industries. The SS will stop as an organization once the war is ended, but it doesn't mean that their belief system or who they are or the people themselves will disappear. The agenda didn't change just because the war ended. And like Anna Joseph told us, said this many times as well, the army surrendered, the Air Force surrendered, the Navy surrendered. The party didn't surrender. And I don't identify, and that's interesting because I did when I started as a young historian, identified the SS and the Nazi party. Oh, the SS is the army of the Nazi party, and a lot of the SS were in the party, and some of the people in the party were in the SS, but I would identify them as one entity. Actually, they were more of two fractions on the same side, where you could find a lot of division between the two, where the SS saw themselves as, well, the party is useful to have gotten us here, now we don't need them anymore. There were no more party meetings after 38? When was it, 38, 39? No, I think 39 was the last time Hitler called cabinet to announce the invasion of Poland. I don't think he actually ever met with the party again after that. So Bormann dealt with the party, and he dealt with the SS, and he dealt with Hitler. And you have Bormann, Gestapo Müller, you have Kammler, you had these people that know each other, and they go back. And they are more of an entity than the party. The party sort of was a vessel to get them to where they wanted to go. And then they, as time went by, took over. And I think the agenda continued as the funds continued. The bankers didn't really go to prison. The industrialists didn't go to prison. The companies that was there then are still there today. For in large part, they changed their names and the addresses every now and again, as some got broken up in smaller parts that are still owned by the same people. I mean, come on, please. Nothing really changed. Millions of people died, and then a few years later, it was business as usual. And a few of the people that got caught that had done too many stupid things that couldn't really be hidden, or they were expendable, well, they were hanged.
Expendable, I think.
People,
yeah.
Just like Himmler. There's no way you can tell me that Himmler killed himself. I do not buy it. He was not the person that would. He had too much. He wanted to negotiate. He thought he was going to that house to meet with Montgomery or somebody higher. The British had no intention of letting Himmler alive because he knew where all the bodies were buried. And he knew the deals that had done. We're back to remembering the SS. A lot of the top SS were from the aristocracy. And they had relations or friendships with the British aristocracy. And there were connections and back channeling communications that Himmler would have been aware of. And negotiations. Hess, why did we lock up Hess for his entire life when the man flew over there tried to end the war by meeting with the British king? Because somebody had suggested that was a good idea. That might also have been Bormann, who had egged him on through various psychics to get him out of the way. Because before Hess disappeared, he was Hitler's secretary. And then Bormann took over as Hess flew out. And Bormann was a ruthless little horny man with a ton of kids. I have no idea. Apparently, he was well known for his libido. Looking at him, you wouldn't think so.
No, kind of pudgy.
Yeah, right. I mean, then again, Goebbels doesn't look like somebody who should have 7 children. But interestingly enough, and if you want to end up there's some indication that the reason why Magda Goebbels married Goebbels was to be able to have an affair with Hitler, because she reminded him of Gailey, which means there's a slight possibility that some of Magda Goebbels' kids were Hitler's, which I guess is a really good reason for them also not to be allowed to survive the war. And it seems from statements made that he initially very much was infatuated with her. But since he couldn't marry, but he wanted her around, well, somebody that was around that was okay with that had to marry her. So Goebbels married her. And she kept being a figure in Hitler and the party life until they all died. Or escaped, as you will. So I just thought
that's really something. Well, that's dedication to the party right there. So
that's what she's actually said. I think she said that to her sister. There's statements to that effect that she actually said that for Hitler and the party, she was willing to marry Goebbels.
Wow,
it doesn't really matter, but it's just an interesting thought to think that. Well, gee.
It would explain a few things. I mean, he's not exactly a masculine dude. I mean,
you see lots of pictures of the Goebbels children with Hitler, and see them all hanging out. They were in the bunker at the end together, and I mean, what the hell was the Goebbels children doing in the bunker to get rid of them? But then again, if any of them had Hitler's DNA, they wouldn't necessarily have had that much fun in the end. They probably wouldn't have had anyway.
Were any of the names Angela? No. Anyway, just
one first name was it Helga?
Sounds like Angela, but some say that's his daughter, but who knows? That's just out there stuff. Well,
I think he had a kid with a girl from France, from World War One. Hitler, he fathered a child during.
Really?
And that I don't think that the person's name ever came forth, but he did have one illegitimate child from World War One.
That's really something. Well, I'm going to do a little. I guess if Goebbels can do it, then I can do it too. I'm just going to say that, you know what, in 2022, Robert Young Pelton and Tino Von Struckmann are going to do a special together where they go somewhere dangerous, risking death, and explore something really fantastic. And it's going to be really great, coming in 2022.
Oh, great.
So I hope you're ready. I don't mean to lay that on you, but, well, you know, if it works, it works.
No, that's fine. What network is paying for this special, did you say?
CNN.
Well, in that case, we should go to Antarctica and look for the ancient ruins, shouldn't we?
There you go, Robbie Young Pelton and Tino Von Struckmann, 2022, sponsored by the History Channel and Discovery, are going to go to Antarctica and they're going to find them Nazis.
As long as they don't have to go to Afghanistan, I don't care.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much for being on. This has been great, and I'll send you a link. Well, it's right there, right? Anyhow, but I'll send you a link afterwards where this is, and take care. And this has been great.
You too. Anytime you want to do this, you let me know.
I will never run out of questions and keep creating that content.
Will do. You too. I'll see you around.
Bye.